Living alone in the wilderness is called the Olympics of survival. The latest season 11 has once again brought forth top-tier players. Not only did they hunt the largest animal ever recorded in the series, but they also caught so many fish they tired their hands. Whether it's archery or setting traps, they scored perfectly in every skill. This is Timber, newly dubbed the Moose Hunter. This video lets us watch his entire challenge in one go. Timber was influenced by the elders around him and fell in love with the wilderness and hunting at the age of 7 or 8. As an adult, he honed his exceptional wilderness survival skills. He now works with his wife in humanitarian aid, traveling frequently to unstable regions around the world. Seeing his 2 sons living a nomadic life, he signed up for the Wilderness Survival Challenge, hoping to win the $500,000 prize to buy a house. On the first day, the show captured footage of the dense forest in Timber's area. It was hard to move silently, which is unfavorable for hunting. Animals would flee upon hearing noises. After walking through the bushes to the riverbank, he saw moose and grizzly bear tracks, but they were old and not of recent interest. Timber returned to the forest, walked deeper, and gradually heard the chirping of squirrels. He located one, drew his bow to full stretch, and shot an arrow that hit the squirrel right in the head, a testament to his excellent archery. He then used the squirrel's innards as bait to set up several fixed fishing rods by the river. While he was busy building a temporary shelter, these might catch dinner. Timber crossed 2 logs and tied them to another large tree, covered them with a waterproof tarp, propped it open inside with a Y-shaped branch, and used wood to roll up and press the excess fabric on the sides. The shelter was then complete. Timber checked the fishing rods by the river and saw one line stretched tight. He pulled it up to find a 25-inch barracuda. Starting with the squirrel meat, he cleaned the barracuda by the river while waiting. After tasting the squirrel meat, he then cooked the fish. The small squirrel wasn't enough to fill him, but the barracuda, white and tender, juicy and succulent, Timber intentionally chose a waterproof quiver to use as a container for storing boiled water. Its capacity of 3.8 liters is enough for him to drink throughout the day. If the arrows are not secured, carrying them around can be dangerous. He cut 4 rows of holes in the arm guard, then sliced it in half down the middle. Folding it, he made a slit above each row of holes to ensure the arrows wouldn't fall out. Finally, he used a rope to tie the extended part to the bow limb, creating a portable quiver. Looking at his reflection by the river, this was the hunter look he wanted. Moving along the riverbank, he spotted very fresh moose tracks leading into the woods. Timber decided to follow the tracks. Unknowingly, he crossed the entire forest and looked ahead to a meadow. Surprisingly, a moose was lying on the other side of the meadow. Using willow trees for cover, he hid behind them and tried mimicking a female moose call to attract the moose. The moose stood up but didn't approach. Now they were 500 yards apart. Not wanting to miss this excellent opportunity, Timber crouched and moved closer to the moose, reducing the distance to 300 yards. Timber shot an arrow at the moose, but it flew just under its chest. The moose didn't run far. This time, with the right strength and precision, the arrow was unfortunately blocked by a branch 3 meters in front of the moose. Back at camp, Timber began to weave a fishing net. The sky gradually darkens. Every morning and evening is the time to check the fishing rods. Today, another barracuda over 80 centimeters long was delivered. That's not all. Another rod had a fish on the hook that was pulled ashore. In a very short time, enough food for 5 days was harvested. Timber decided to take this opportunity to establish a permanent shelter. He chose an ideal spot in his mind, picked up a saw, and cut down logs one by one. He planned to build an A-frame shelter, which looks like a triangle. Timber first set up the frame, then laid logs on both sides. The walls were quickly filled in, with moss packed into the gaps. One side was used for the fireplace and the other for the front door. In just 1 day, the shelter was mostly completed. The next day, he enjoyed a breakfast of tender, flaky fish, which quickly replenished the energy spent working. Suddenly, Timber heard footsteps outside the forest, sounding like a moose. He quickly grabbed his bow and arrows, and followed the sounds outside. Indeed, there was a moose feeding on the grassland. The terrain was advantageous. Stepping onto the river embankment, the moose was within the lethal range of the bow and arrows. Then he drew his bow and released the arrow. After the moose was hit by the arrow, it turned and ran towards the forest. He could hardly contain his excitement, and viewers through the screen shared his joy. Upon reaching the moose, He realized it was enormous, weighing around 1,200 pounds. Timber could not even turn it over. After partially skinning it, Timber immediately took out the organs to cool outside, and the strong wind was spreading the bloody scent. He feared attracting bears and wolves, so he lit a campfire nearby. The fire acted as a deterrent and also signaled to predators that this was human food. He also roasted some meat over the fire. Cutting up a large animal was time-consuming and exhausting. By 7 p.m., Timber had processed half of the moose. The other half of the moose was left behind. Timber worried about it all night, but fortunately nothing happened. It took him another 3 to 4 hours to finish cutting it up and moving it all back to camp. Back at camp, Timber first stewed a pot of meat for himself. He also planned to build a food storage room. Timber chose a location by the river for the storage room, where the terrain was lower and colder air would settle. Timber cut a large amount of timber from the woods and used these logs to build the walls on the prepared foundation. He placed the moose meat on a layer made of branches and sticks. By 2:08 p.m., the storage room was completed. The next morning, he was shocked to find a mink inside the storage room. Timber gathered all the fat, cut it into chunks, and rendered it into oil in an iron pot. Timber used birch bark and wooden discs to create containers for the rendered fat. He cut the large pieces of meat into long, thin strips, hung them on sticks, and placed them at the top of the cabin. Soon, the entire roof was filled with meat. Timber started a fire inside the cabin, controlling the oxygen flow through the door to achieve a smoky effect. Sitting by the fire, eating meat, he felt his stress release, leaving him relaxed and satisfied. On day 19 of the competition, Timber finally completed smoking all the deer meat and returned it to the storage room by the river. Today, he took some time to brew spruce tea. He also used it to dampen arrowheads and shave. Today, he moved back into the log cabin and made himself a comfortable bed. He used 2 logs for the bed posts and covered them with wood and branches. Timber felt physically drained. Now he was experiencing cold and hot flashes and sweating profusely. This morning, he chopped wood to fill the bed frame and used fresh branches as a mattress, significantly increasing the comfort level. While sawing wood, he inadvertently extended his left thumb too far, with hygiene conditions poor in the wilderness, which could lead to sepsis and another potential withdrawal from the competition. Timber found some spruce resin. He applied it to the wound for effective protection. He was woken up by the howling, about every hour throughout the night. At dawn, he went outside to the grassy area near the cabin and saw fresh footprints. Timber was not worried about facing these animals, but was concerned they might steal food. He decided to check the original moose butchering site to see if the rib cage was still there. He noticed fresher grizzly bear tracks. When he reached the butchering site, the rib cage was gone, with only the bear's tracks remaining. Based on his years of hunting experience, he guessed that the bear was likely hiding in a nearby willow grove. He quickly retraced his steps back to the grassy area outside the cabin. The temperature was dropping quickly, and 4 days later, he could see swans migrating south. Timber decided to add an insulation layer to his cabin using dead horsetail ferns, laying them outside the shelter and securing them with sticks to prevent slipping. For a touch of primitive style, he also mounted a pair of moose antlers on the roof above the cabin's front door, enhancing its wild and rustic charm. On day 30, with temperatures only a couple of degrees above freezing, continued to fish vigorously before the river froze. He caught a fish, approximately 24 to 28 inches long. He threaded a steel wire with a rope through the fish's gills and out its mouth, tying a knot. The other end of the rope was tied to a long pole, which he then placed back in the water. To celebrate a month of solitude in the competition, Timber planned to cook fish fillets fried in deer fat, anticipating a delicious meal. As he was about to start cooking, he heard splashing sounds from the river. He found that another rod had caught an even larger pike, providing about 16,000 kilocalories of energy. Following the same method, he tied it up and placed it back in the river. Just as he left the riverside, a gray crow swooped down to steal the fish fillets he had prepared by the fire. Timber caught this scene just as he returned. Fortunately, the fish was only pecked a few times and not taken away by the gray crow. Timber didn't have long to rejoice over saving it from further loss, as he soon discovered that the fish stored in the pantry had been raided again. So Timber decided to build a new storage room that would be impervious to all animals, where he first needed to saw plenty of logs. After assembling a square frame with a steel structure, he layered the wood to the desired height. For lining, Timber decided to use moose hide, which was tough and thick enough to deter small animals from chewing through. However, before laying it, he needed to patch a hole made by an arrow shot. Paracord wouldn't suffice. He had to use steel wire, which was also tough to chew through. Using a punch from his multi-tool, Timber made holes and threaded the steel wire through, quickly sewing up the hole. He laid the moose hide with the furry side facing outward, which would help absorb moisture when storing food. He then prepared several pieces of wood of equal length, cut notches at their ends, and placed them on top of the wooden box as a lid. The final step was adding a locking bar to secure the storage room. On day 32, with heavy snowfall, the surroundings were blanketed in white. Timber saw 4 moose grazing on the grassland outside the cabin, possibly a family of 4 searching for food. Perhaps because he had enough moose meat, or due to hunting regulations from the show organizers or local laws, Timber did not harm them. After enjoying the scenery, he finished working on the storage room. He saw a marten scurrying away, indicating that it was not afraid of humans but couldn't penetrate the new storage structure. This was precisely the effect Timber desired. The storage room was almost complete. Only one locking bar was yet to be installed. Timber aligned the logs against 2 large trees, then carved notches and fitted the logs into them. He hammered several wedges into the gaps, making the connections tighter so that large animals could not easily open it. The river had frozen over, and even without any special treatment, the food would not spoil quickly in the current temperatures. Timber went to retrieve the 2 fish he had left in the river, but unfortunately, the long pole tied to a 1-meter-long pike was missing. The frozen ground left no tracks, so it was unclear whether a bear, otter, or beaver had taken the fish, or if he had underestimated the fish's strength, allowing it to pull the pole away. Luckily, the smaller pike was still there, and Timber managed to recover it. He cleaned the fish by the river, removing the innards and cutting off the heads before placing the bodies in the storage room to freeze and preserve them. Recently, Timber has caught the attention of martens. Every day, they come to raid his storage room. Unafraid of humans due to their protected status, the martens boldly head towards the storage room in front of Timber. Quietly, he takes out his bear banger and fires it at a nearby tree next to the marten, then shoots another round in the direction it flees. He hopes this will deter them from coming back. Now, he needs to check the fishing rods at the river. On his way, he spots the long pole bound with the barracuda reappearing on the water's surface. Whether the fish is still on it is unknown, but he must retrieve it to find out. Timber hooks the pole, feels a tug, and realizes the barracuda is big enough for several meals. He quickly kills and stores the fish, feeling much safer. With snow falling, he moves the fire inside the cabin, which introduces a new problem. Poor smoke ventilation makes the air unbearable. The next day, Timber cuts away excess moose hide left outside the storage room and uses it to create a smoke shield inside the cabin, which significantly improves the situation. There's plenty of smoked moose meat, but it's too dry and tough, causing him dental pain. Timber needs fresh food. His traps in the forest yield nothing, but upon visiting the site where he had previously slaughtered a moose, he finds the chest skeleton dragged away by a bear. Using only bones left, he cuts several ribs to make fishing hooks. According to the show rules, if hooks are among the selected tools, only 25 hooks can be carried. Timber, now down to 4, decides to make his own. He breaks the moose ribs, selects suitable pieces, sharpens both ends, and drills a hole in the middle for the line, creating a double-barbed hook that prevents fish from escaping once swallowed. Timber quickly sets up a fishing rod by the river with his new hooks and checks his traps in the woods. The first 4 are empty, but to his surprise, the last trap contains a lively snowshoe hare. Timber swiftly dispatches it, relieved not to have to eat dry moose meat tonight. Rabbit meat is high in protein but low in fat, which alone could lead to malnutrition. However, Timber has plenty of moose fat to enrich the rabbit stew, ensuring a nutritious and satisfying meal. Securing food must not be neglected, nor should mental needs be overlooked. In his spare time, Timber engages in handicraft, carving 2 fox heads out of wood with a multi-tool, and adorning them with the fur of a squirrel he caught on the first day. He plans to give these as keepsakes to his 2 sons upon returning home. The fox carvings are quite lifelike, proving that wilderness experts are also craft masters. Timber notices he has lost a lot of weight, having shed 13 kilograms since the challenge began. He needs to consume more fish and fresh food. The fishing rods hold his high hopes. Arriving at the river, he spots a mink patrolling the shore. Following the mink's path, Timber finds the fishing line with his homemade double-barbed hook stretched tight, pulling up another barracuda, his speech nearly incoherent with excitement. The double-barbed hook, lodged in the fish's throat and protruding from its gill, makes it impossible for the fish to spit out. This is exactly the effect Timber wanted, boosting his confidence in his homemade hooks, eliminating his worries about running out of hooks. Living alone in the wilderness feels like a holiday. At this moment, he feels like the king of the contest. While others start working at dawn, Timber can still lie in his sleeping bag, nibbling on moose jerky, only leaving the shelter after he's somewhat filled. However, moose jerky is hard on the teeth. He needs more rabbits and more fish. After last night's blizzard, many animal tracks were quickly covered by fresh snow. Finally, one trap was triggered, but somehow the animal escaped, leaving the surrounding snow in disarray, with no clues about the escaping animal. The other traps caught nothing. With the temperature dropping, securing food is becoming increasingly difficult. Although Timber could survive 100 days on deer meat, he does not want to exhaust his supplies, as that would also indicate a worsening situation. That evening, while he was sitting by the fire waiting for dinner, a wolverine found his food storage. It tried to pry open the wooden lid to eat the meat inside, growling deeply. Timber inside the cabin heard the noise. He quickly grabbed his axe and went outside, but the wolverine had already disappeared. At dawn, he found the tracks it left in the snow. The moose jerky in the storage was undamaged, but the barracuda innards stored in a barrel were completely eaten. Having succeeded once, the wolverine might return. Timber must be prepared. Following the tracks across from the cabin to an open field, he discovered the wolverine was following his scent from yesterday, likely attracted by blood traces on his shoes. Timber is ready to hunt, but first he must temporarily retrieve the wire snares in the forest, as the slight struggling noises of trapped rabbits could alert the wolverine, who would then steal his catch. For now, he sets aside the intense and harsh matters of survival. He found half a moose antler in the wilderness, drilled holes in it to make a guitar body, used a straight, dry piece of wood for the neck, and topped it with moose ribs. The guitar strings were made from 6 steel wires. Timber uses music to alleviate his loneliness and stress. The moose jerky was over-smoked. He sewed a t-shirt into a bag, hoping to hang some jerky inside the wooden cabin to soften it naturally for easier chewing. However, he found mold on many pieces, confusing him since he had smoked the meat thoroughly. He abandoned the idea, fearing worse mold outside. For lunch today, he planned to eat fish, noting his dwindling moose fat supply, essential for maintaining weight. Despite eating plenty, the lack of carbohydrates left him feeling hungry, and his weight slowly dropped. On day 62, the river ice was thick enough to walk on. Timber walked to the center, cut a hole, and set up his fishing rod, hoping to catch smelt as before. After finishing, he needed to warm up. He lit a fire with dry spruce twigs, which burned quickly due to their rich, flammable resin. The flames quickly reached the ceiling, threatening to start a fire. He hastily brought a pot full of water from outside, sprinkled it over the precarious ceiling, and hung the pot to suppress the flames. He removed some large logs to reduce the fire. Though he avoided a fire, it was a close call. Timber needed to enhance the cabin's fire safety. He took down the moose hide, previously nailed up, and refitted it above the fireplace. He also patched many dry, mossy spots with mud, minimizing the fire risk. However, removing the moose hide worsened the cabin's smoke ventilation. He couldn't find a way to improve it, but it was still habitable. With another heavy snowfall, the ice was covered, insulating it and slowing further freezing, making the ice thinner and fragile. In sub-zero temperatures, it was hard to imagine open water areas. Timber's bait was taken, but no fish were caught, at least proving fish were still active. Other rods remained still. Due to overflow, his shoes got wet in the slush, speeding up the cooling of his feet. He felt numbness in his right pinky toe, worried about frostbite. He took off his shoes and socks. His toes were not black or purple. With proper warmth, there shouldn't be major issues. Once, he forgot to remove his shoes while warming his feet, smelling a burnt scent. The right shoe's edge was partially melted. Luckily, he noticed in time, and the cracked gap could still be pinched closed. Otherwise, in this weather, wearing damaged shoes could lead to frostbite within an hour. Checking the gill net is a daily routine for Timber. He first chops through the newly formed ice, then slowly pulls up the fishing line to haul out a barracuda. It's been a while since he caught a fish since the river started to freeze over. This time, he doesn't plan to ration the fish but intends to eat as much as he can. He places the cleaned fish on a wooden plank next to the fire to roast quietly. While waiting, he uses birch bark as paper and charcoal as a pencil to draw, helping to distract himself and avoid thinking of home. Later, he carves 10 wooden dolls and 2 dice to play werewolf inside the shelter. To increase the chances of catching fish, Timber takes out a new gill net he hasn't used yet and sets it underwater in an elaborate process reminiscent of the winter fishing in Chagan Lake, hoping the net catches more fish. That evening, Timber tosses and turns, unable to sleep because both of his feet are nearly numb from the cold, possibly due to insufficient food intake not generating enough heat. He has to stand up and move around, otherwise frostbite could severely limit his ability to go outside. That night, he only manages to sleep for a couple of hours, suspecting poor circulation in his feet because he hasn't been skimping on food. The only solution might be to eat more. His t-shirt bag is filled with moose jerky, but it's not all of his stock. Timber has estimated that even if he eats more each day, he could still last over 100 days. However, he dislikes the idea of depleting his supplies. The hard, tough moose jerky is also starting to cause his gums to bleed. The fishing rods and gill nets carry Timber's hopes, but fishing through the ice has only yielded 1 barracuda so far. He even wonders if the fish have left the area. Tonight, Timber plans to indulge by eating the entire fishtail. However, suddenly reminded of the many people around the world who are starving, especially those in turbulent and underdeveloped areas, he decides to leave the fish outside to feed the wildlife that are also in need of food. The poor results from ice fishing lead Timber to set a few traps in the surrounding woods. Yesterday, he spotted fresh shuttlecock tracks and quickly set up a steel wire snare. Fortune favors the bold, and today one of the traps caught a snowshoe hare. Delighted with this timely catch, as it's been many days without catching any game, he really needs a good meal to lift his spirits. Facing the camera, Timber shares his unique way of eating by pulling out half of the hare's lower jawbone to use as a spoon, perfect for scooping out the brain. As one of the few fatty parts of the hare, the brain is too precious to waste. He thoroughly enjoys this delicious rabbit meal. Day 81 arrives, and Timber has not caught any game in the past few days. His mental defenses weaken as he recalls different stages of the challenge. It began with sunny weather and lively animals, and he enjoyed it immensely. As winter arrived, the number of animals rapidly decreased, leaving Timber feeling isolated. The days became painfully long and difficult. He takes out the phone designated for quitting the competition, torn between staying and leaving. After pondering, he decides to stay a few more days, hoping to win the championship. Returning to the river to check his gill net and fishing rods, he hears the ice crack under his feet. A misstep could mean falling through, forcing him to quit for safety reasons. Timber decides to retrieve the fishing rods and gill net, relying solely on his snares for food in the future. As the competition progresses, contestants' resistance to setbacks weakens, and thoughts of quitting emerge more readily. By day 83, just 2 days after he last thought of quitting, Timber questions the point of continuing the endless struggle against his competitors. No longer interested in the prize money, he feels he has proven his capability to stay for 100 days. Regrettably, Timber makes the call to quit, narrowly missing out on the championship. Roland is known as a legendary contestant in wilderness survival competitions. The winner of Season 6, Jordan, may not match him, but his achievements are equally impressive. Jordan can shoot a 700-kilogram moose with an arrow and fell a wolf 5 times his weight with an axe. Whether ice fishing or setting gill nets, he always nets results. Compared to Roland's lengthy championship run, Jordan's journey is more compact. Jordan hails from Virginia, USA. Growing up on a farm, he is used to solitude. He spent 5 years in Siberia, living with the local reindeer herders, and acquired essential survival skills. Jordan believes in his strength to at least make the top 3, even if he cannot win the championship. On the 6th day, Jordan first appeared making a lean-to shelter and crafting a birch bark horn that mimics the mating call of a female moose. Earlier, he had set several wire snares supported by sticks along animal trails and had high hopes for these traps. Jordan did not gain weight on purpose for the competition, knowing that if it came down to starving, he couldn't last as long as others. His only chance was to actively secure food. However, after scouting around, he found the area near his camp was green, but a large surrounding area had been scorched by wildfire, causing massive animal fatalities. Although the show's location choice has its pros and cons, this was hard to accept. Unexpectedly, within 3 days, Jordan's traps caught 4 rabbits, changing his perspective on the resources in his area. These rabbits provided at least 4 days' worth of food. In his shelter, Jordan skinned and gutted them, using parts he usually wouldn't eat, like the heads and offal, for soup, aiming to not waste anything. The taste might not be great, but the meal was nutritionally needed. That evening, a bull moose approached outside his shelter. Jordan thought about grabbing his bow to hunt it, but realized that by the time he got out of his sleeping bag and dressed, the moose would likely have fled upon hearing him. Although rabbits provide protein, their fat content is sadly minimal, whereas moose fat is abundant. Jordan found the moose's tracks leading to a weedy area just 70 to 80 meters from his shelter. Delighted to be closer to the moose, he prepared an early warning system, hanging cans on a paracord that would clank if the moose stumbled into it. Using the birch bark horn, he mimicked the call of a female moose in heat every few minutes. At 5:30 p.m., his alarm system sounded.
Oh, crap. My early warning system.
Thinking it was perhaps a black bear, Jordan sneaked out in thermal pants, bow at the ready. It turned out to be a large antlered moose. Hidden behind bushes, he drew and released an arrow, which unfortunately landed between the animal's legs. Caught off guard and rushed, he had only brought 1 arrow and missed his chance for a follow-up shot. The rabbits he had previously caught were already eaten. Jordan stood by the lake fishing for a long time without any luck. Now, feeling very hungry, he thought about setting traps for hunting, which he found more satisfying. He wondered whether the rabbits had been depleted or if the scent had given away his intentions, as his traps remained untouched. With nothing else to do, he decided to build a fence to guide the moose into a muddy ambush spot. Jordan had some techniques for chopping trees. First, he would soften the fibers on the back with an axe, then chop diagonally. Trees as thick as an arm could be felled in 1 stroke. He used these trees to create a fence, which moose would not usually jump over, but would instead be guided toward the mud where they would trip a rope. On the 20th day, Jordan's situation was still tough with no triggered wire traps. Just as he thought about changing locations, he was energized by the sight of a moose at the edge of the forest. He quickly shot an arrow and confirmed he had hit the moose after observing carefully. Following the blood bubbles on the ground, indicating a lung injury, he found the dying moose standing still, seemingly waiting for death. He cautiously refrained from shooting immediately, to avoid startling the moose or causing it to charge in a final struggle. Jordan waited beside it from 9 a.m. until noon, when the moose finally collapsed. The moose weighed about 800 pounds, and butchering it was challenging with only a small knife. Even experienced hunters with proper tools take 2 hours to complete such a task. Jordan proceeded slowly, first removing the hide and the innards to cool down the carcass, then dismembering the limbs and other parts. Fortunately, the hunt was completed by noon, giving him ample time to process the body, which he continued until 10 p.m. before packing all the meat back to camp. With many predators in the forest, Jordan hung part of the meat in a tree, built a raised triangular platform to keep another part off the ground, and transformed his shelter into a smokehouse for the rest. Given the current temperatures, the meat would spoil in 5 days if unprocessed. Jordan worked against time to smoke each piece of meat for preservation. By 4 p.m., the first batch of meat had a smoky sheen, extending its shelf life. To protect his gains, Jordan decided to sleep beneath the meat. That night, he covered the meat outside with branches and stayed half awake, ready to chase away any thieves. This moose entirely changed his situation. The crispy exterior was delicious, and in the following days, Jordan turned into a mukbang star, eating roasted moose meat and performing for the camera. However, this comfortable period did not last long. The next morning, on the way to the food storage, he noticed many footprints and recognized them as those of a wolverine, a relentless hunter that can prey on animals and plants under the snow. Fortunately, the moose meat was unharmed, and Jordan thought it would be safe left as it was. After dark, Jordan couldn't fall asleep, and the wolverine visited again. He heard noises but rushed out without his bow and arrow, only to watch the wolverine slip away. Jordan thought his scare would keep it away for the night, but the next day he was shocked to find it had eaten all the fat stored in jars. Losing a few pounds of meat was one thing, but fat was crucial for maintaining weight. Without enough, even with hundreds of pounds of meat, he would starve and possibly have to leave the competition. Angry at the wolverine's actions, Jordan decided to set up tripwires around the food storage with cans hanging on them, positioned just high enough for the wolverine to trigger. That night, Jordan stayed by the fire, listening for disturbances. As expected, the wolverine returned. But this time it triggered the tripwire, revealing its presence. Jordan grabbed his bow and arrow and disappeared in front of the camera. The wolverine's roar followed. Jordan returned with an axe, muttering that he'd nailed it to the ground. A few axe chops later, the wolverine was silenced. The fight ended quickly, and Jordan successfully killed the wolverine that had stolen his moose fat. Its body was mostly muscle with little fat, hardly compensating for the lost moose fat, but it eliminated a potential threat. To prevent further incidents, Jordan decided to build a more secure food storage. He chose 4 nearby trees, cleared their lower branches, and built a standing platform in the middle to facilitate sawing off unnecessary trunks. He then constructed a solid wood floor on top to store the deer meat and made a ladder for easy access. He removed some bark to make it harder for animals to climb, streamlining his operations. On day 45, medical personnel examined Jordan. Although there were no major issues, he had lost 30 pounds in the last month due to insufficient fat intake. Continuing this way, even surrounded by hundreds of pounds of moose meat, he might still have to leave the competition due to physical reasons. Jordan immediately cooked a pot of fatty deer meat. After eating, he went fishing by the lake. Previously, he disliked standing idly, but now he needed to find a way to get fat from fish to maintain his weight. After a long, uneventful wait, a fish finally tugged the line. He quickly reeled it in, almost pulling it to shore, but at the last moment, it escaped with the bait. It was a 3-pound fish, enough to meet his fat needs for 4 days. Frustrated, Jordan felt like cursing. No more fish bit after that, and he couldn't understand how he could hunt a moose yet still potentially starve. Fishing was his weak spot, and he was unsure what to do next. Jordan thought the deer head could be useful and planned to scrape all the fat from it, especially the fatty tongue. He exerted much effort to cut it off whole. He believed this large piece of meat would not disappoint. Jordan cut the deer tongue into small pieces, mixed it with other fats, and heated it in a pot. After 5 minutes, he had rendered all the oil. He didn't waste the oil residue either, packing it into a tin can as a snack. He used a piece of birch bark as a funnel and carefully poured the oil into another can. Half a month had passed since he last killed a wolf. Today, as Jordan climbed the ladder to check the food, he noticed bite marks on the meat and some of the fat was missing. Footprints around the area told him another wolf had visited. With his previous experience, this time he tied steel wires around each of the 4 posts. If a wolverine climbed up, it could get its arms and legs caught. He also set up tripwires between the posts with cans hanging on them, and more cans near his bed for a better alarm effect. Living alone for a while, Jordan began to miss his family. This feeling was not conducive to winning the championship. To pass the time and make the days go faster, he used birch bark as material and carved numbers on it with a knife, making himself a set of playing cards. He stayed indoors and played solitaire, which was actually quite a good way to pass the time. By day 63, the lake at the contestants' location had frozen over with a thick layer of ice. Jordan had new plans for the future. He carved a shuttle from birch wood and started weaving a fishing net outside his shelter, using parachute cord. Netting was a tedious and monotonous task, and the low outdoor temperatures affected his dexterity. It took him 2 days to complete the net, which he weighted with elk meat. This morning, he also made a pair of snowshoes. Now fully prepared, Jordan wore the snowshoes to the deep part of the lake. He wielded an axe and energetically broke the ice, taking 20 minutes to open 2 holes. He inserted a stick connected to the net into one hole and pulled it out from the other, then dragged the net underwater by pulling the rope. He piled snow around both holes because the high air content in snow greatly reduces heat transfer, making it less likely to freeze. After waiting 3 days, Jordan once again walked onto the ice to check the net, hoping not to return empty-handed again. As it turned out, fortune favored him this time. He caught a large fish, which froze as soon as it emerged from the water. This lakefish could provide about 3 days' worth of fat. Jordan eagerly sliced open the fish's belly on the ice and enjoyed the fresh and satisfying sashimi of fish intestines. The appearance of this fish changed the situation of surviving without fat intake and reinforced his confidence in winning the championship. On day 70, Jordan cheerfully went to get some meat for breakfast, but the least expected event still happened. Yesterday, he forgot to remove the ladder. Early in the morning, he saw the ground covered with branches that had fallen from the food storage area. Jordan exclaimed that this was a disaster. Climbing up, he saw that the little fat left on the moose meat had been completely gnawed away. What upset him the most was the fish, the one he hadn't even allowed himself to eat, had its fattiest parts, the skin and belly, completely devoured by a wolverine. Surviving longer without fat was not possible. Jordan had no other solution but to rely on the fish in the lake. He chiseled open the hole with the gill net, shone a flashlight into the water to attract plankton, and thus lure the fish. Unfortunately, the flashlight's bright light was limited, and after much effort, he caught nothing. That night, he tossed and turned in his shelter, unable to sleep. Wolverines had stolen at least 15 pounds of his fat, a loss of over 60,000 calories. Now, with fishing also going poorly, he doubted whether his body weight could last until the end. On day 77, Jordan went ice fishing on the lake, with little hope. But this time he was not empty-handed. He caught a dogfish weighing 3 to 4 pounds, its belly plump with fat. Jordan took a selfie with the fish against his back for the camera. Today was the day the crew conducted their medical checkup. Back at the shelter, he immediately stewed the fish, not planning to save it like before. The medical team's helicopter had already landed. Jordan was still leisurely stuffing fish into his mouth, determined to boost his energy levels, worried he might fail the medical checkup and be eliminated. When asked how he felt, he told the others that although he was thin, he was still very strong and healthier than anyone else here. As he recited the lines he had prepared to prove his strength, his wife Janalee approached from behind. 4 days ago, the last competing contestant, Varnia, had withdrawn. Jordan became the winner of this season's $500,000 prize. Roland, the champion of Season 7, is a favorite among solo survival fans. He defeated a musk deer weighing 800 pounds with a small knife, shot a 300-pound black bear with a bow, built a luxurious shelter, and created a food storage room that was extremely secure. This made him the undisputed king-level contestant in this series challenge. While others worried about basic necessities, he enjoyed steaks and even gnawed on tender and chewy pork knuckles. This video will cover his journey to victory in one go. First, let's introduce Roland's profession and background. He lives in Alaska, USA, and is a hunting guide. He does not believe that humans and wilderness are one, but firmly believes in the survival of the fittest. Usually he either leads hunting expeditions or chops wood. He joined the competition not only to win the $1 million prize, but also to prove his strength and skills. The first scene is from day 3 of the competition, where Roland had set up a temporary shelter with a tarp. Nearby, a fire was burning in a birch log housing an anthill. The intense heat drove the ants out, and adhering to the principle that even a mosquito is meat in survival, Roland took the birch log, pinched off the ants one by one, and ate them all quickly. He then didn't forget to chop the log with an axe to check for any remaining ants. After enjoying his breakfast, he went out to familiarize himself with the environment. While passing by a sandy area near a lake, he noticed footprints left by a black bear, although they were old. Roland was searching for fresh traces of large animals. Soon, he found a tangled bundle of fishing line in the bushes. Although it was a mess, with patience, it could definitely be used. Since Roland didn't have fishing gear among the 10 tools he carried, he returned to the lake to find a suitable fishing spot. Suddenly, a wolverine burst out from behind a rock and ran straight at Roland, but turned away after a brief pause. Usually, wolverines can take down prey 5 times their weight and are not easily scared off. Roland then cheekily took out his axe. Near the camp, there were plenty of berries. Roland tirelessly collected them, first putting some in his boots to season them, then dumping them into a hollow tree trunk. Storing food for the winter in the Arctic is crucial. If he couldn't catch large prey, at least he had these berries. He had already filled 5 such hollow tree trunks. Later, Roland took his axe to a discovered stone pile and decided to build his permanent shelter there. The so-called stone pile was actually just a pile of rocks. Roland planned the general shape and framework in his mind, then broke ground. slowly building the walls with the disorganized stones. The heaviest of these stones weighed 90 kilograms. Moving them undoubtedly consumed a lot of energy, but the stones were excellent insulating materials. Once the shelter was built, it would definitely save Roland a lot of precious heat. The walls were almost complete by the afternoon, and for the chimney, he built a frame with large stones and filled the gaps with smaller rocks. Relying on his excellent physical condition, Roland completed the stone transportation work for the shelter in 3 days. The second phase involved logging to construct the roof. Roland chose trees as thick as water buckets, each weighing nearly 200 pounds. He then used an axe to carve notches at both ends of the logs, fitting them together. Due to frequent squirrel sightings around the camp, Roland set up several wire snares in the trees and quickly caught some squirrels. He planned to cook the cleaned intestines as well. After stacking 3 layers of wood on the stone house, it was tall enough to stand in. Roland estimated that cutting 10 more logs would complete the roof. Despite his efforts to conserve energy, this intense work consumed at least 500 calories per hour. With the final log in place, only a layer of moss and a tarp were needed to finish the roof. Roland's initial phase was not easy. While others had some success with their fishing nets, his had remained empty. Fish, rich in fat, are ideal survival food. Roland needed to find a breakthrough, so he moved his fishing net to a deeper part of the water. He then collected orris roots, a seemingly insignificant food that could sustain life. Orris roots contain about 11 grams of fiber, 5 grams of protein, and 3 grams of fat per 100 grams. Roland built a storage pit next to his shelter for the roots. On day 22, Roland's situation was still precarious. He hoped for fish in his net, having not eaten much meat for a while. His perseverance paid off today with 2 shiny big fish in the net, a lake trout and a white salmon. Their large size made Roland optimistic about lasting 100 days and winning the $1 million prize. However, unpredictably, heavy rain that night and high lake waves forced him to retrieve the net to prevent it from being swept away. The next morning, the waves were still too high for fishing, making his challenge even tougher. Despite feeling a mix of sadness and confusion, having fish to eat helped control his negative emotions. After finishing a large bowl of fish, Roland waited for the weather to calm before moving the net back to its original spot, hoping to catch more fish. Suddenly, Roland spotted a black bear on a distant hillside, with the wind blowing from the side, likely keeping him undetected. He saw a chance to approach quietly with his bow and arrow, aiming for a fatal shot. Unfortunately, after 2 hours of maneuvering, the bear disappeared into the forest. Standing where the bear had been, Roland could smell the smoke from his own camp, realizing the bear was likely drawn by it. Now, he could only hope the bear would return. On day 29 of the competition, Roland's net came up empty again. Since catching those 2 fish a few days ago, he's had no luck. Frustrated, he prayed for better fortune. Unwilling to risk wandering the mountains in search of game, a gamble that might exhaust him, he kept his bow and arrows ready for any chance encounters with wildlife. Roland returned to the berry patch and dug for iris roots, expecting the unexpected. While digging, he spotted a muskox 100 meters away. An opportunity too good to miss. Dropping his task, he aimed at the muskox and shot an arrow, hitting it in the hind leg. The muskox, thinking it was bitten, moved away from the ridge. Roland quickly followed. 3 kilometers from his camp, the muskox is dying, but it was still able to stand after 5 hours. With night approaching, Roland couldn't wait any longer. He took the risky step of stabbing the muskox in the belly with his knife, then quickly backed away. The muskox, too weak from blood loss to chase him, could only roar in anger. Seeing its weakness, Roland boldly delivered another strike, and then a third. Finally, the muskox was brought down. Excited, Roland noted he had killed the musk deer with his knife. With only an hour and a half until dark, he quickly removed the muskox's internal organs to cool the ox's body and slow the growth of bacteria. He cut out the heart and ate it raw, praising its texture and flavor. After peeling off half of the muskox skin, Roland packed some of the organs to take back, leaving the rest at the mercy of nature, hoping it would be less appealing to any black bears. The next morning, he started early from his stone house, imagining encounters with wolves and bears along the way. Fortunately, he faced no such dangers, but the muskox's stomach contents were found to have been eaten, while the meat was intact, a fortunate outcome. Roland removed the deer's legs and some tenderloin for dinner as a reward for his hard day's work. With decades of experience butchering animals, he skillfully used an axe and knife to continue processing the deer. Crows gathered above, potentially attracting predators like black bears and wolverines. Unable to transport all the meat that day, Roland moved it to a hilltop, cover it with muskox hides and secure it with stones and branches, creating a makeshift concealment. With the arrival of a heavy snowfall, the ground was covered in a blanket of white and the temperature dropped below zero. Roland cooked a musk deer heart and eagerly enjoyed it by the fire, savoring this reward for a hunter. The meal provided energy for his afternoon task. Roland planned to bring back all the musk deer meat from the mountain. Near the stash, he noticed fresh bear tracks on the ground, giving him an ominous feeling. Sure enough, some meat was stolen again, including a fatty tongue, parts of the brain, and jaw meat. The bear must have stayed nearby. Roland's immediate task was to transport the meat back, a 6-kilometer round trip. He could only manage to carry half of the several hundred pounds of meat that day and planned to return for the rest the next day. The next morning, Roland saw new bear tracks. The bear had visited the meat stash twice and was likely still around. Roland then spotted a black mass on a distant hillside. The bear that had been stealing his meat. Armed with his bow and arrows, he successfully killed the bear. Despite successfully bringing back hundreds of pounds of meat, with 70 days left to survive, no one could guarantee a win. It was crucial to use every part of the prey to maximize the chances of success. Roland didn't introduce the contents of the bag he was holding, but those who know. He sliced it and cooked it with other organs to make a delicious soup, which would be very comforting to consume. While waiting for the soup, the tenderloin was already grilled, turning Roland into a gourmet vlogger, showing off enjoying the meal.
Oh. Holy that turned out perfect.
After eating and drinking, Roland lay down for a satisfying nap before resuming work. He saved some brain, containing lecithin, a natural emollient, to apply on his gloves to prevent cracking. This not only preserved leather goods, but also worked for daily skincare. While other contestants were still surviving, Roland had upgraded to living mode. With too much meat crowding his cabin, Roland planned to build a food storage shed. He envisioned a small cabin with a sealed roof, using thick logs and mortise and tenon joints to form a square structure. He would lay a wooden floor to prevent animals from sneaking in from below. The walls would be built up to over 1 meter high, with a pair of stakes nailed at each corner, tied together with wire. Meat from both the cow and bear would be stacked inside, with branches between layers to prevent sticking. The top would be covered with wood, and the door would be secured under the wire, making it hard for any bear to open without alerting Roland. He had already cleared the path between this storage and his stone house for easy access in case an animal tried to steal the food. On day 45, Roland's morning broth had little oil, lacking the usual richness. In the wild, without enough carbohydrates, the best way to maintain weight is by consuming fats. Roland decided to dissect the muskox's head, showing the camera that the lip fat alone was enough for a day's eating, as was the fat from the nose, and even the cartilage could yield some oil. After demonstrating, he sat at the doorway, scraping the fatty layer from beneath the musk deer's facial skin with his dagger. Facing the harsh Arctic winter, even as a contender with hundreds of pounds of meat, Roland lived tightly, careful not to waste anything, mainly due to a shortage of fat. Roland then reconsidered the fish in the lake, placing his gill net where he had previously caught fish, hoping to secure more for a firmer hold on victory. At that moment, an astonishing sight occurred. A group of muskoxen appeared on the opposite hillside. Roland, who had not brought his bow and arrow while setting the net, chose not to attack the deer. Based on years of hunting experience, he knew that tracking a group of animals was difficult and risky. Thus, he wisely decided not to disturb them. Back at his stone house, Roland took special care of the musk deer hide, fixing it to the ceiling to smoke it, making the fur tougher and perfect to use as a blanket on his bed as the weather grew colder. Going to the lakeside to check the net became increasingly perilous, and Roland accidentally slipped. Fortunately, he wasn't seriously injured, which could have forced him to forfeit the $500,000 prize. Severe weather made the lake turbulent, hampering fishing. The nets not only failed to catch fish, but were also difficult to retrieve from the rocky walls, frustrating Roland enough to utter a string of expletives.
Can't put a damn net in and like that. If I lose my net,
He had to temporarily abandon his fishing plans until the lake froze over. Aside from the fishing struggles, Roland was quite lucky in other aspects. For instance, standing at his doorstep, he watched a squirrel frequently climbing a tree, which piqued his curiosity. Upon closer inspection, he discovered the squirrel had stored many mushrooms there. Roland chopped down the tree with his axe, appropriating all of the squirrel's food. There were too many mushrooms to store properly. So he took the scalp of a musk ox, sewed up all the openings, made slits in the leg skin, and fashioned a shoulder bag, filling it halfway with mushrooms. On day 55, the temperature dropped to minus 15 degrees Celsius. Ice formed a thick layer inside the stone house. Roland had to keep the fire going 24 hours a day to maintain a basic temperature inside. He also had to periodically clear snow outside to prevent it from turning into ice on his shoes and being tracked inside. Piling the snow around the house also helped insulate it. 11 days later, only 3 contestants remained. Bored in the stone house, Roland sang and planned to pick some rose hips before they dried out completely.
then rock house and eat wild muskox meat and squirrel mushroom stew.
Unexpectedly, he encountered a porcupine while out gathering. Roland considered it a gift from nature, as porcupines are slow and rely on their quills for defense. Troublesome for other animals, but easy for humans to handle with a simple clubbing. Roland killed the porcupine with his stick, just in time for Thanksgiving. He used a rope from his sleeping bag to tie its front legs, satisfied as he headed home. With beef and bear meat still at home, and now this new addition, Roland finished his meal, comfortably picked his teeth, and looked forward to Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving Day, he built a bonfire outside, placing the whole porcupine on it to cook, opting not to skin it so as to preserve all the fat, increasingly vital as the competition progressed. After burning off the hair and washing the porcupine, he stewed it until tender, creating a deliciously tempting dish. This fatty meat perfectly replaced the traditional turkey, dripping with grease as Roland had hoped. However, survival days are never smooth. Roland took out a beef shank for the next meal and found the fat gnawed clean by mice. Heartbroken and worried, he checked his fat reserves to ensure not too much was stolen. Prepared for the worst, he was furious to find a tennis ball-sized piece of fat completely eaten. Yet, he was powerless against the mice. He decided to store all his fat in a musk ox bag and hang it from the ceiling, using smoke to deter the mice. By day 76, the lake where Roland was located finally began to freeze. He prepared for ice fishing, crafting a sharp hook from wire and using animal fur as bait. Wearing a heavier coat, black bear gloves, an Arctic wolf fur hood, and carrying a musk ox leather bag, Roland truly looked the part of a wilderness hunter. The ice on the lake was thick enough to walk on, but just in case, Roland still carried a long pole. If he suddenly broke through the ice, he could use the pole to pull himself out. He headed to a deep part of the lake where he had seen fish jumping before it froze. Setting up his fishing spot here seemed ideal. Roland chopped a 40-centimeter square hole in the ice with an axe and began to fish, standing still beside it. Usually, he didn't have much luck fishing at home, and this time was no different. After a few hours without a single bite, he didn't want to waste more time here. Going forward, he aimed to just gather the essentials for survival each day, such as water and firewood. Now, with only 5 to 6 hours of daylight left, Roland needed to cut enough firewood during the day to last through the night. Otherwise, if the fire went out, the stone house would quickly turn into an ice cellar in the minus 40 degrees Celsius temperature. Chopping wood took up most of his time, leaving very little for gathering food. By day 86, there were only a few berries left. Driven by intense cravings, Roland planned to finish them as a snack. Removing the moss covering them, he found the berries beneath had molded. Food should have been stored in a colder place. Roland had kept the berries in a wooden box on the ceiling, where the fire's heat rose 24 hours a day, causing the berries to spoil from the warmth. Realizing his mistake, Roland was thankful he had other supplies, such as the musk ox stomach stored in a corner, which was edible and nutritious. Under these primitive conditions, Roland simply heated the stomach and spooned it into his mouth. The taste was indescribable, and Roland admitted that he would never take food for granted again. Fetching water was a daily necessity, and currently the most dangerous task due to the winter's average daily snowfall of 19 centimeters. Roland only walked a few steps further into the lake, and when he turned back, he could barely see the tree line. He had to quickly follow his own tracks back before new snow covered them, or he risked getting lost in a blizzard. Even if he called the crew to quit, rescue wouldn't arrive immediately. Only when he saw the clear tree line could Roland finally relax, as he knew these paths by heart and no longer worried about getting lost. On day 89, the last remaining competitor was medically evacuated due to frostbite, leaving Roland as the sole contestant. According to the show's rules, he had to last 100 days to win the $1 million prize. Thus, Roland still had a few more days to endure. Today, he's eating beef hooves. The cooking method is simple. Just roast them over a fire until cooked. They turn pitch black, like fresh potatoes. He bites off a piece. It's dry, hard, and tough to chew, but still not bad overall. On day 92, he tries ice fishing again, cutting a 40-centimeter square hole. Unfortunately, nothing changes. After fiddling with the fake bait for a long time, there's no movement. With just a few days left, Roland doesn't bother struggling anymore. He prepares the firewood for the night and spends the rest of his time sleeping and reflecting on life in the cabin. Day 99 is Christmas. Roland places a Christmas tree on the snow pile at the cabin door and makes a 4-pointed star out of wire, securing it to the top of the tree. Despite being in the wilderness, he maintains a sense of ceremony. On day 100, he carves the final mark on a tree, bringing the challenging journey to a successful closure. Lying in bed, Roland is filled with emotions. He dedicates this victory to his recently deceased mother, planning to use the prize money to spend quality time with his family. As his sister calls out to pick him up, Roland rushes out of the stone cabin and embraces her, celebrating the hard-won victory. Roland still treasures a few beef bones, the marrow inside as rich as king crab meat. His sister hesitates a bit as she tries some, while Roland enjoys it heartily. With this, he has successfully survived 100 days in the Arctic. She is Callie, the runner-up of Season 7, who has killed 2 porcupines and captured 4 snow rabbits in a single day, surviving 89 days in the wild. Let's take a look at her entire challenge. After reaching adulthood, Callie primarily lived in the wilderness, dedicating herself to all aspects of survival, such as making traps, tanning leather, fishing, and hunting. She joined the competition both to win the $1 million prize and to further hone her wilderness survival skills. On the 6th day, Callie found a rotten chicken leg in the forest. While others might find it disgusting, she took it as a sign of good luck. Before understanding the patterns of large animals and fish, Callie targeted squirrels and rabbits. She set wire traps along the animal trails she found. The rest of her time was spent wandering around to become more familiar with her surroundings. Unexpectedly, she encountered several wolves in the forest. Curiosity drove her to follow them, although she quickly lost sight of them. The presence of wolves was not good news as it likely reduced the number of nearby animals, affecting Callie's survival. By this time, other contestants had found their bases and were starting to build permanent shelters. Callie struggled with this. Despite searching in all directions, she found no suitable flatland. She settled for the best available spot, which required leveling the ground and collecting logs to construct her shelter. After a few uncomfortable nights in a shelter that offered little protection against the wind, she decided to move it to a more sheltered location. Building a house is time-consuming and laborious, and without sufficient food, one might be exhausted by the time it is completed. Callie, armed with her bow and arrows, ventured into the forest and heard a noise in a rocky area. Looking down, she saw a porcupine. She quickly shot a blunt arrow which hit but did not penetrate the animal. Unsure if the porcupine was dead, she used a sharp broadhead arrow to finish it off. After taking 2 hits, the porcupine lay still in the crevice of the rocks. Carefully, she pulled it out. The porcupine, North America's second-largest rodent, can weigh up to 14 kilograms. Although Callie disliked killing, she needed the meat and fat from the porcupine. She took it to the lake, gutted it, skinned it, and removed the inedible organs, leaving the meat along with the liver, kidneys, and heart, which nearly filled her pot. With this, Callie could finally focus on building her shelter. She moved the built part of her shelter to a new location intact. After a week's depletion, only porcupine soup remained, but the shelter seemed unchanged. Time waits for no one, and where the next meal will come from is still unknown. Fortunately, Callie had set many traps in the woods early on. Regrettably, the first one she checked was empty. Luckily, the remaining traps caught a rabbit. Callie immediately killed the rabbit upon returning to the camp. With the addition of 2 rabbit meals, she constructed the door of her shelter. With some time before winter, Callie had discovered clay at her site at the start of the challenge. Since she carried few containers, and one pot was insufficient for both water and cooking, she decided to make some clay pots now. After digging enough clay, Callie shaped it into long strips in her dwelling. If the shaping was not ideal, she would add some rocks and sand for tempering. Then she formed the clay strips into a pot shape, placed them at the edge of the fire for a basic baking and shaping, and finally fired them in the fire to make pottery. After a busy day, she ended up with 2 fairly decent-sized pots. By day 25, Callie was ready to build a fireplace and complete the final ceiling of her dwelling. She dug stones from the ground. Although calories were rapidly depleting, the stone fireplace would be better at storing heat. Once built, it would surely improve the temperature inside the shelter, reducing Callie's energy consumption. After gathering enough stones from nearby, the remaining work was like playing Tetris, stacking the stones layer by layer to form a semicircular fireplace. She then applied wet clay in the gaps. Afterward, Callie tested the fireplace and found the smoke exhaust worked especially well. The space left next to it was simply built into a wall with the remaining stones. The upper triangular area using wood, alternating a piece of wood with a layer of moss, gradually sealing the entire wall. In fact, she had the blueprint of the house in her mind early on, knowing it wouldn't take much effort, so the building proceeded at a steady pace. By day 34, the challenge area welcomed its first snow. The snow meant berries withered and wood moistened, but it also left animal tracks in the snow, making it easier for Callie to track them and set traps in appropriate positions. However, Callie also encountered an unexpected gain during this outing. She saw many mushrooms stored by squirrels on a tree, and she unhesitatingly took some of them. Upon returning to the shelter to rest, the bloodstains on the cutting board attracted a weasel. It was rare for a living creature to dare approach her in the wilderness. Callie neither drove it away nor killed it, but watched it eat the remnants on the cutting board and leave. It's time to check the traps again. Perhaps due to her kindness, the first trap had a rabbit, a typical catch for Callie. She didn't expect much, but she caught a second one, totaling 4 snow hares for the day. These hares provided about 650 grams of protein, though they were low in fat, only 72 grams. Callie deeply thanked nature. Due to the low fat content of the rabbits, eating them alone couldn't maintain her weight. She had lost 20% since the start of the challenge. That day, she found porcupine tracks in the snow, an ideal food source because of its higher fat content. Unexpectedly, she also found wolf tracks next to the porcupines, indicating it was being tracked by the wolf too. Callie could only hope the wolf hadn't succeeded. With the Arctic winter approaching, all animals were desperately competing for limited food. After following the tracks for a while, Callie was stunned to see the snow covered with dense hare tracks, completely obscuring the porcupines. Although she couldn't locate the porcupine, she could set several traps for hares, making the trip worthwhile. On day 44, Western Halloween, Callie dressed as a porcupine to show respect for the animals. Though she had eaten the last porcupine nearly a month ago and now only had snow hares, to celebrate the festival, she decided to indulge and stewed an entire hare, planning to eat it all clean that night. The next day, Callie finally remembered to make a fishing net. She had tried fishing before, but the wind at her location blew the fishing line back, making it impossible. Other contestants had caught up to 20 fish, but having a net, even a crude one, was better than none. She finished the net in one morning, though its mesh was quite large, likely unable to catch fish under 2 pounds. Callie, having lost the porcupine, now saw fishing as her only way to obtain fat. Unfortunately, the area had a disadvantage. The lakeshore was all rocky. Before the temperatures dropped, she could fish standing on the rocks, but after the drop, the rocks were covered with thick ice, making them very slippery. While choosing a spot to place her net, Callie slipped, injuring her face and lips, bleeding heavily, but not severely enough to require stitches or to force her to quit the competition. She resolved to focus on land animals before another temperature drop. With another cold spell, the snow in the challenge area increased, burying her traps halfway and undoubtedly affecting their efficacy. She had to reset them daily as securing food became increasingly challenging. Callie had no choice but to take a step she had long avoided. She had tracked a porcupine den and checked it several times, never finding the occupant at home. Today, she plans to try her luck again. Callie saw several pieces of bark chewed off outside the porcupine den. Undoubtedly, this was the work of the porcupine, indicating it hadn't been eaten by other predators. Callie found the porcupine's tracks, placed a steel wire snare between a tree and the base of a stone wall, and waited for the porcupine to venture out for food. 2 days later, when Callie checked, she was greatly disappointed. The porcupine had pushed the snare aside, completely ignoring her plan. Time waits for no one. Since the trap didn't work, she decided to take a tougher approach. Callie squeezed into the crevice where the porcupine was hiding, about 4 meters deep, a tricky spot unreachable with a bow and arrow. She found a back entrance to the burrow, scared it toward the front, then returned, drew her bow, and shot it. The porcupine quickly became motionless. Callie squeezed in and pulled it out. This was risky. If she got stuck, it was uncertain whether she could call for help or if rescue could find her in time. She might even freeze to death. However, risk often correlates with reward. The porcupine had stored a lot of fat, essential for Callie to maintain her weight. She hurried back to the shelter, eager to butcher the porcupine and prepare a substantial meal. Unfortunately, she discovered white spots on the porcupine's liver, a sign of tularemia, posing a risk of infection if consumed. She was conflicted, hesitant to discard it but afraid to eat it. As time passed, on the 64th day, increasing snowfall severely affected her traps. Walking to check them consumed more calories, but yields were diminishing. The imbalance between intake and expenditure made the porcupine meat increasingly appealing. 4 days later, with her food supplies nearly depleted, Callie decided to risk eating the porcupine. She saved organs like the kidneys and liver for bait, boiled the rest of the meat longer to ensure safety, as she had already been exposed to the pathogen and hadn't fallen ill after several days. Callie cooked a pot of fat and meat until it was well done, then began to eat. The rich soup was almost tear-inducingly comforting. The long-missed fat revitalized her body, making her feel fully revived. This meal could sustain her for at least 3 more days. The porcupine's fat helped stabilize Callie's weight, and she regained enough energy to chop wood and split logs as before. Unfortunately, her good days were short-lived. While working, Callie felt a sharp pain in her right shoulder. She took off her clothes and used a light to see that a porcupine quill had penetrated her flesh, despite the layers of clothing. The medical kit provided by the show included tweezers, which Callie used to grip the exposed porcupine quill. Despite the pain, she managed to pull out the barbed quill. By day 78, the lake in Callie's area had frozen over. In a few more days, it would be thick enough to support a person, signaling the upcoming ice fishing season. However, Callie faced a new physical issue. She felt a tingling pain at the tip of her right big toe. Upon removing her shoe and warming by the fire, she discovered a large blister that had turned purple and was numb to the touch, clearly indicating frostbite. If not properly protected, this could lead to necrosis and amputation. To avoid being medically evacuated for health reasons, protecting her toes became crucial. On day 82, temperatures dropped to minus 33 degrees Celsius. The ice on the lake was now sturdy enough to support a horse. Callie decided to go ice fishing. Catching even 1 or 2 fish would allow her to stay at least 10 more days. Using familiar techniques, she chopped a hole in the ice, used rabbit fur and porcupine kidneys as bait, and attached a weight made of clay. She then waited quietly. Normally, she could stay outside all afternoon, but now, due to her frostbitten toe, she had to get up and move every hour or 2, or return to the shelter to warm up. This significantly limited her ability to gather food. Her fishing efforts were unsuccessful, with no bites after spending an afternoon by the hole. Now, daylight lasted only 5 hours, and Callie had to prepare the firewood for the 19-hour nights during this time. Therefore, checking the traps she had set in the woods each day became crucial. Fortunately, her spirits were high. She neither missed her family enough to want to go home, nor felt low enough to quit. This trip out was not in vain, as her trap finally caught a rabbit. Since the snow had obscured the animal's paths, setting the noose in the right place had become challenging. Catching the rabbit was a much-needed boon, as her food supplies at the shelter were nearly depleted. That evening, Callie fried a pot of rabbit offal using porcupine fat. As the delicious smell filled the shelter, her mouth watered uncontrollably. She praised how delicious the rabbit offal was, stating it was exactly the life she wanted. By day 88, after resetting the gill net in the lake, she drilled another hole and sat down to fish. Despite her good spirits and determination, the fishing was poor with no activity all afternoon. Tonight, her pot contained only leftover bones, which she boiled into a broth to fill her stomach. With only 12 days left to reach the 100-day mark and the tempting $1 million prize, she resolved to endure the hardships for herself and her family. However, her frostbite was not improving and began to spread under her toenail, which worried Callie the most. The next day was medical checkup day for the contestants. Considering Callie's earlier frostbite, the doctors were particularly thorough. After a detailed examination, they found that the frostbite on Callie's right foot had worsened significantly since the last checkup. The lack of food would make recovery difficult, and continuing could cause irreversible damage to her body. Additionally, a new frostbite was forming on her left big toe. According to the show's rules, she had no choice but to end her challenge on day 89. William grew up in an isolated community on the southern coast of Labrador, where the harsh living conditions had him hunting from a young age, accumulating a wealth of relevant experience and skills. Now a commercial fisherman, he has been fishing for shrimp and crab for 30 years. He joined the competition intending to use the prize money to buy a new house in a better natural environment and retire early to spend more time with his family. On the first day of the competition, the production team showed footage of William just moving his luggage to a clearing in the woods. Before he could even take a few minutes to catch his breath, he took out a gill net from his backpack. While other contestants chose to carry more paracord to weave themselves for better cost-effectiveness, William had his own opinion. He didn't want to spend time weaving and just wanted to quickly find a river to set up his net so that he might catch fish for dinner while he was busy working. He had no experience hunting large animals and had planned to focus on fishing, with hunting partridges and snow rabbits secondarily. William found a spot to set up a temporary shelter. Since it was temporary, it had to be quick. He sawed a few thin spruce trees and constructed a basic frame on a slope. Just covering it with a tarp would suffice for a simple shelter to last 10 days or half a month. Perhaps because of his age, this bit of physical work was somewhat exhausting. He thought to take a break and check the net by the river. William saw the net moving. He initially thought it was the wind, but on closer inspection, there really was a fish inside. Less than an hour after the net was in the water, he was pleasantly surprised by the catch. William pulled the fish out, just thinking about how to eat it, when suddenly the pollock in his hand forcefully escaped. His smile instantly froze. This start to the competition was truly lackluster. He could only lament to the camera. That night, William had to go to sleep on an empty stomach. 2 days later, he was still upset. Now, with a low energy level, he was fortunate to find some rose hips around the camp. As the saying goes, even a mosquito is meat. A bite is a bite. Relying solely on this small amount of food would soon become unsustainable. William discovered obvious rabbit trails in the brush, along with fresh droppings. He hadn't wanted to set traps so early, but the situation was not optimistic. He found a tree trunk to lay across the path with a stretchable wire noose. Since losing that fish, William had become a bit anxious, too many thoughts flooding his mind, needing time to sort out. He kept telling himself to slow down, focus, and tackle things one at a time. His own life in Labrador and the environment here had some differences. He needed time to adapt. William crossed the woods to a marshy area with a shallow stream. He saw several fish swimming around. William picked up a branch and smashed it onto the water surface, using the shock wave to stun the fish and easily collect them. Although they were all small juveniles, quantity could lead to a qualitative change. William caught 5 fish in one go, and cooking them with berries in a stew would still be delicious. By day 7, William had made a fake lure with colorful ropes at the camp, surprisingly effective. Early in the morning, he caught a pollock. Before breakfast, he still had to check the traps in the woods. Whether there would be a catch, he wasn't sure, as he had never stayed in this kind of environment before. The answer would soon be revealed. William was doubly fortunate as his lasso caught him the first snow rabbit, providing meals for 2 more days. He initially intended to submerge the rabbit in water to refrigerate it, but decided instead to dig a hole on the lower riverbank. He stuffed some birch bark into it, which contains betulin to prevent food oxidation and spoilage. Coupled with the cold air sinking, this method could preserve the rabbit for about 6 days. With a few days' food supply, William didn't idle, but moved up the construction of a permanent shelter on his list of priorities. He built a triangular frame against the hillside using birch wood and covered it with a tarp to complete the basic shell. The shelter was small, aiding in heat retention. The final touch was a fireplace for heating. William sewed his leg wraps into pockets to conveniently carry mud from the riverbank. The fireplace, built from stones and mud, was less likely to catch fire. As he was about to fetch more mud from the river, he spotted a grouse on a nearby meadow, an opportunity not to be missed. William didn't use a bow and arrow, nor had he brought one to the competition, but he had his own hunting method. He tied a steel noose to the top of a branch, a sort of mini lasso. He quietly approached the grouse, which remained on the ground rather than flying away, making it an excellent target. He aimed to slowly loop the steel wire around the grouse's neck. Just as he struggled to find the right moment to strike, he noticed another grouse perched on a nearby branch. Decisively changing targets, he extended the noose and captured the bird, demonstrating a truly enlightening tactic. What others might miss with a bow and arrow, he managed with a lasso. Now with an abundance of food, William knew better than to put all his eggs in one basket. He found a crevice in the rocks, stuffed the grouse inside, and sealed it with stones. Even if predators found it, they wouldn't get all his food. After securing it, he picked up his lasso again, as there were 2 more grouses nearby. The one running up the hillside was difficult to catch, so William targeted the one on the branch, successfully capturing it again. He saved one for backup and prepared the other for a perfect dinner. 4 days later, pleased with how things were going, William decided to enjoy a sun bath as a treat to himself. Afterwards, he went to retrieve the hidden grouse for eating, only to be shocked upon reaching the rock wall. Feathers covered the ground, and the grouse had been eaten to the bone. The snow rabbit hidden by the river had already been stolen, and now this. More challenging than obtaining food was storing it. By the 20th day, William went to the river early in the morning and caught 3 fish, which helped him recover from the loss of his food. He smoked the fish in his smokehouse. His morning started with a pot of birch bark, tough and chewy but eaten for its sugar and carbohydrates to maintain a more balanced diet. William consumed a bit every few days and planned to go out and gather berries for more sugars and vitamins, a tastier and juicier option than bark. Walking along, he spotted a pine marten in a tree ahead. His food had been stolen multiple times because of them. Unfortunately, local laws protected pine martens, so he couldn't set traps for them. William could only watch helplessly, worried about the fish in his nearby smokehouse. He quickly turned back to check, only to find that the fish had been eaten to the bones overnight. A week's worth of food gone. That would unsettle anyone. William suddenly found himself out of ammunition and food. He urgently needed to find new food to sustain himself. He hadn't checked the gill net yet today. Fortunately, there was a fish in the net, which slightly improved his mood. To prevent it from being stolen by pine martens again, William cut the fish in half and placed it in a pouch made from his leg wraps. He tightly tied the opening and attached it to the end of a stick, which he then leaned against a tree branch over the cliff. Hopefully, hanging it over the edge would keep it out of the marten's reach. When not hunting, William would gather berries, not missing any opportunity to consume calories. During foraging, he found a long-discarded bottle. To most people, it was trash, but to survivalists, it had many uses. William thought to use it as a urine bottle since going out in the cold at night was quite chilly. Problem solved. Today, the gill net brought no new catch. He had to rely on the last bit of fish in the pouch. Food was becoming scarce, making his days increasingly tough. On his way back to camp, he discovered a new rabbit trail and set up several wire snares, hoping to quickly catch a plump snow rabbit. William did not waste a drop of the fish soup he cooked. He even ate the bits of meat at the bottom of the pot, making sure to consume all the fish oil. After drinking the last few sips, he officially ran out of food. Winter was approaching, and every day he saw flocks of swans flying south. While gathering food, he also had to reinforce his shelter. Later, he tied 2 hooks together to reduce the chances of fish escaping. He found a spot that seemed rich in resources and began the monotonous task of casting and retrieving a fake bait in the river to attract fish. After an indeterminate amount of time, William saw a pollock follow the bait. Unfortunately, he reeled in too quickly and missed the chance to hook it. Luckily, the fish didn't swim away. When he cast the bait again and pulled it back, the pollock bit, and this time, there was no escape. William pulled it ashore with a swift motion. He also had several traps set for snow rabbits and squirrels to check, so after cleaning the fish, he stored it in the pouch and went to attend to other tasks. His snares were effective today, catching a second snow rabbit after half a month. This catch was a significant rebound, providing enough food for 3 to 4 days and giving his traps and the gill net another 3 to 4 days to catch something. Hungry, William hurried back to stew half of the snow rabbit. After boiling it for 5 minutes, it was ready to eat. The delicious rabbit head could not be missed. William used a stick to pick out the brain and savored it immensely, finding it indescribably tasty. The half-rabbit filled his stomach, and he hid the rest for the next day. Having food in hand eased his mind. However, William's food was either being stolen or on the verge of being stolen. As the temperature dropped, frost appeared on the ground each morning. He planned to go to the river to retrieve the fish for breakfast, but he was shocked upon arrival. A pine marten was climbing the tree trunk, stealing the fish meat from the top. The creature was quick, grabbing the bag and refusing to let go. William hurried over and chased the marten away. Fortunately, he discovered it in time. The supposedly secure bag had been bitten through, and the fish inside partially eaten by the marten. Considering the potential bacteria in wild animal saliva, the fish tail needed to be cooked thoroughly before he could safely eat it. William waited almost half an hour before he dared to eat. This was his last bit of food, and after finishing it, he would need to go out and search for more. On day 35 of the competition, the first snowfall arrived, making foraging more challenging. Other contestants had some reserves, but William's pantry was empty. However, he wasn't very anxious. Yesterday, he set a trap for beavers by the river. Based on past experience, it would be better to check it after 2 or 3 days. Given the ever-present pine martens, he couldn't afford to wait. William wasn't very hopeful, but surprisingly, the trap quickly caught a young beaver. He dispatched it with a quick blow, and although it wasn't the adult beaver he hoped for, having something to eat was good enough. This catch could sustain William for a couple of days. Upon returning to camp, he quickly processed the beaver because he noticed crows circling overhead, which could attract nearby predators. Every extra minute spent there was a minute of increased danger. William found a small cave filled with broken stones and decided to hide the beaver meat there, covering it with rocks for added security, assuming it would be safe unless a black bear came along. Today's lunch was boiled beaver head, rich in quality fats from its tongue. A week of frugal living followed. The last bit of beaver meat stored in the cave was ready to be eaten today. William prepared beaver claws, a part usually discarded even in survival situations. However, William valued not wasting any food. The claws were cooked until tender, and the skin peeled off easily. He ate them like chicken feet, without any qualms, and soon only a few bones remained. The traps were less successful in the following 2 days, catching no snow rabbits, and the ice on the river made using the gill net temporarily impossible. The remaining beaver meat was his last bit of food. William went to retrieve some pieces but found numerous pine marten tracks in the snow near the small cave. He wasn't panicked, knowing the meat was buried under rocks and hard to remove. He confidently uncovered the stone pile, but unexpectedly, all the beaver meat was gone. He couldn't believe his eyes. After turning the cave inside out and finding no meat, he was truly in a bind, especially now when he needed food to withstand the cold. However, William didn't dwell on his misfortune. He quickly adjusted his mindset and began planning to obtain new food. The ice on the river was thick enough for fishing. For safety, he decided to make an ice ladder to distribute his weight and prevent falling into the water. William collected some dead wood and tied the logs to 2 handrail posts with paracord. The process was straightforward and quick. While he was busy working, a grouse flew by too quickly for him to react, so he didn't see where it landed. But soon he noticed another grouse flying overhead and saw where it landed. Returning to camp for his lasso pole, he found the grouse hiding in the bushes. He managed to catch 3 grouses with the pole, a remarkable feat. Each grouse could provide about 500 calories, a significant and timely boost. Excited, William did a little dance for the camera. After processing, he first tasted a few bites of delicious grouse liver sashimi, which felt great. Then William set up his fishing rod on the ice, using grouse innards as bait, aiming for the vicious, sharp-toothed pollock. He made a long hook line with wire to prevent the pollock from biting through the line and escaping. He secured the fishing rod at the hole with ice blocks, so if a fish bit, the line would move. He only needed to check the ice occasionally to see if a fish was hooked, allowing him to multitask by cooking meat and fishing simultaneously near the riverside where he had made a fire. The delicious grouse meat didn't take long to cook thoroughly. Famished, William eagerly started eating. The meat was firm, dense, and juicy, which pleased him greatly. However, while eating, William did not forget to keep an eye on his fishing line on the ice, as he noticed it seemed to move slightly. After watching intently for a few seconds, he confirmed it was indeed moving. William quickly got up, grabbed his camera, and rushed over with lightning speed, pulling a barracuda from the water, the largest fish he had caught so far. For William, who was in a dire situation, this catch greatly boosted his morale and reinforced his resolve to survive. He threaded a rope through the fish's gills and mouth to secure it, storing it in the water to protect it from being stolen by martens. By day 59, William had visibly lost a lot of weight, but this did not shake his determination. Returning to the ice, he set up 3 fishing rods in one breath. Now, any fish passing this section of the river might bite. Additionally, he planned to make an ice box to store bait. William constructed it from blocks of ice he chiseled out, covering the top with more ice blocks to facilitate easy bait changes. On day 63, William spotted another grouse and used a lasso pole to pull it down from a tree. Now, catching grouse had become routine for him. He was calm. Previously, he might have excitedly recited a long script. Nowadays, it was just a basic operation for him, nothing to make a fuss about. Afterwards, he went to check the gill net and fishing rods, saw that the bait on the rods was untouched, and lost confidence in the net. He voiced doubts about catching any fish, although he didn't truly believe that. As it turned out, sometimes saying the opposite is better. Feeling the heavy gill net, he knew there was something substantial inside. William pulled up a large fish, weighing about 5 or 6 pounds, a significant catch. He couldn't help but kiss the fish before hiding it in the icebox. Having been robbed before, William chiseled more ice blocks and piled them around, then poured water over them to ensure the blocks froze together, making it impossible for martens to break in. Indeed, as soon as William walked away from the river, a marten, attracted by the smell, found the icebox but couldn't get inside and reluctantly left. William, seeing this, smiled proudly. After 3 quiet days this morning, he placed a pile of firewood under a tree and snared another grouse from it, the 5th one he had caught. Even seasoned bow hunters had not caught as many. Adhering to the principle of using what nature provides, he discarded the innards he didn't eat to feed the pine crows. With Canada's vast lands and sparse population, wildlife resources are truly abundant. As usual, William popped raw grouse liver into his mouth, having a special fondness for sashimi, though he ate sparingly to avoid parasites that could jeopardize the competition. After finishing up, William checked the fishing rods and gill net again. The 4 rods were still quiet, so all his hopes rested on the net. Once he broke through the ice, he quickly pulled a fish from underneath. The gill net came through in a crucial moment. William thought it was just one fish, but as he continued pulling, he realized there were more. He carefully landed another fish that was nearly escaping through the mesh, raising his voice in excitement. With enough food to last 10 days, William began to envision staying until day 85 or even day 95, unless the crew came to pull him out, as he had no intention of quitting voluntarily. On the 35th day, William did not discard the fish innards, but kneeled on the ice to enjoy them as sashimi. With Inuit ancestry and an Inuit wife, he is accustomed to eating raw meat and tasted it effortlessly, bite by bite. As the weather grew colder, making a fire became more necessary than ever. Concerned that continuous indoor fires could dry out and ignite the building materials, William decided to build a shelter outside. He simply constructed a tripod of logs and covered it with branches, allowing him to warm up before sleeping and then crawl into his sleeping bag. The 74th day was William's young son's birthday. Unable to be with his child, he expressed his love towards the camera. William built a large fire outside the camp, preparing to celebrate his son's birthday with good food and rest. The icebox by the river had frozen solid, and he had to use an axe to access the fish inside. He took a fish head, stewed it until it was perfectly tender, and ate it heartily from the ground, affirming that hunger is indeed the best spice. What might be considered cat food, he devoured with relish. As the competition progressed, all contestants greatly missed home, and the isolation became increasingly unbearable. Yet, William remained as steady as a rock. Missing his wife's chocolate cake was his only concession. He had no thoughts of quitting. Contestants often feel guilty for not being with their families, but William explained clearly that winning the $500,000 prize meant he could spend much more time with his family later. Although William's food supplies were low, his mindset ranked among the best of all contestants. His first task each day was still to check the traps. With each day, daylight decreased by 10 minutes, and in 17 days, polar night would begin. William needed to stockpile as much food as possible. Unfortunately, all traps were empty this time, but luckily, he found an area with many snow rabbit tracks and quickly set several snares there. The gill net and fishing rods hadn't produced any yield recently, and a drop in water levels indicated colder temperatures and fish moving to deeper waters, making future catches more challenging. Despite these difficulties, William praised his shelter for its good insulation and continued to strive for food, following the principle that effort yields rewards. This time, his trap caught a snow rabbit, providing another 2 days of rations. William immediately returned to camp, skinned and cleaned the rabbit, and cooked half of it to start his meal. As the steaming rabbit meat filled his stomach, his morale was boosted and his spirits lifted. However, the trap soon stopped yielding catches. William knew that with over 80 days without a winner, some contestants must have caught large game like moose or black bear. Even suspecting he was at a disadvantage, he was determined to give his all, as quitting was out of the question. With his strong will, William unnerved Timber, a contestant who had bagged a moose, even though Timber had enough jerky to last 100 days. Unable to bear it any longer, Timber made the call to quit the competition. On the 84th day, William received a medical check notification from the production team while in his sleeping bag. To ensure he wasn't forced to leave due to health reasons, he quickly got up and stewed some fish meat, eating what he could. The crew asked him about his long-term plans, making William think victory was still far off. He just smiled, assuming his competitors still had plenty of food, not realizing he had already won. It was only when his wife tapped him on the shoulder from behind that he understood he had finally endured to the end. This Canadian contestant was influenced by his grandparents and grew up hunting and fishing. He has extensive experience in all aspects of wilderness survival and has lived for a long time in forests, similar to the challenge location of this season. By joining the Wilderness Solo Challenge, he aimed to use the prize money to open a survival skills school to share the joy of the wilderness with more people. Wyatt made his first appearance on the show on the second day. He constructed a temporary shelter using 2 spruce trees as vertical supports and tying a horizontal beam across them for the shelter. He then covered it with a tarpaulin, securing the corners and finally layering branches to isolate the cold, hard ground. The lake at the competition site was home to trout and pike, fish Wyatt was familiar with from childhood. He clearly prioritized fishing as his main source of food. After settling his shelter, he started making a gill net from parachute cord, a more cost-effective choice than carrying a pre-made one. With his energy still high at the start of the competition, Wyatt finished the gill net that afternoon. He then built a frame on the shore and set the net far into the lake, hoping for a quick meal. While waiting, Wyatt didn't idle. He began crafting a fishing rod, creating a reel from 3 wooden handles and using wire for guide loops. Using just a few simple tools, he fashioned a proper lure fishing setup. However, his initial high hopes for the gill net were met with quiet, and 2 days passed without a catch. Fortunately, by then, his fishing rod was ready. Wyatt chose a promising spot to test the resources, but as time ticked by without any fish biting, a wind from the north arrived first, stirring up waves on the lake. He had to retract the fishing rod and wait for the wind and waves to pass. That night, the wind did not cease, and Wyatt could feel the tree roots under the ground swaying with the wind, which could have uprooted them, severely jeopardizing his challenge. Thankfully, the situation was not dangerous, and everything calmed down by morning. Wyatt aired out his sleeping bag and clothes, and eagerly went to check the gill net at the lakeside. Despite the overnight storm, chances for fish seemed slim, but some things are unpredictable. Wyatt was overjoyed to see a beautiful pike in the net. Until then, he had only eaten berries, mere snacks for a grown man. So this fish was significantly meaningful. The 35-inch pike provided over 700 grams of protein. No wonder he was so thrilled. At the lakeside, he found a flat stone to use as a cutting board, skillfully filleted the pike, removed the bones and guts, then built a smoking grill from stones. The smoky, aromatic scent of the fish, with its crisped skin, made Wyatt's mouth water. He tore off a small piece, tasted it, and found the flavor and texture remarkably delicious, with a protein content many times that of beef. He mentioned he could eat this smoked fish for 3 months without any issues. Afterward, Wyatt upgraded his shelter. The permanent shelter was essentially complete. Next, he planned to redeploy his gill net. During the process, he spotted several otters swimming across the lake. This was mixed news. The downside was that otters are potential food competitors nearby. The upside indicated that fish were present. Wyatt had not seen any moose or bear tracks in the woods, leaving him no opportunity to hunt large animals. His hopes were pinned on fishing. For this, he upgraded his lure by wrapping it with bright golden wire, which contrasted sharply with the lake water to attract more fish. The effectiveness of this change would only be known through trial. Wyatt spent several hours fishing by the smoking area without success, so he decisively moved to another spot. As dusk approached, he finally felt the exciting tug on the line and caught a trout weighing over 2 pounds, lifting his spirit significantly. He built a small stone pool on the shore to keep the fish fresh, planning to process it the next day. He continued fishing, hoping to catch another before dark. After a patient wait, the line tightened again. Wyatt held his breath as he reeled in, and although the fish struggled, it did not manage to escape and was quickly landed by Wyatt. This fish was no smaller than the first, significantly improving his dire situation. 2 fish would easily last 4 days. His only concern was potential theft by animals from the pool, but since the shelter was nearby, he believed he could hear any disturbance. However, the next day, he was shocked to find the fish gone. He hadn't realized that many minks lived in the area, and keeping the fish by the shore was like offering them a buffet. Wyatt had taken a shortcut, and nature had harshly punished him. Now, unable to change what happened, he returned to the lakeside to fish again, hoping to recover his losses. Thanks to the effective lure, it didn't take long before another fish bit. Excited, Wyatt successfully landed it without incident, a 3 to 4 pound fish. He processed it on a stone slab and cooked it in the smoker, eagerly savoring the meat. After days without meat, the protein was incredibly satisfying. He couldn't describe the feeling, choosing instead to fully enjoy it as a reward for his hardships. Over the next few days, he caught 2 more fish. For contestants who often went an entire afternoon without a catch, Wyatt's results were impressive. He was very pleased with the performance of his golden lure and planned to catch several more fish to store. Opportunity quickly presented itself, and Wyatt smoothly landed another fish, nearly 2 pounds. Confident in his golden lure, it seemed he was just a step away from being the champion. However, as they say, no surprises in the wilderness is the biggest surprise. While struggling with the second fish, the unexpected happened. The pike, known as waterwolf for its sharp teeth, bit through the line and escaped with the lure. Wyatt had overlooked this possibility. Nevertheless, there was no point in dwelling on it. He made another golden lure, this time reinforcing it with a length of steel wire as a leader to prevent bites. After this, Wyatt returned to the fishing spot, determined not to be defeated by a mere pike. He faced many challenges over the years and could certainly handle this. There was still good fishing at this spot. Although he lost a fish midway, it was still encouraging. He moved to another spot, only to face another setback. A pike bit through the line again, taking the new, unused lure. This brought Wyatt to a new low. On day 24 of the competition, after several setbacks, Wyatt finally had some luck. He caught a fish in his gill net, although the net itself was badly damaged and almost unusable. Fortunately, the fish weighed 2 to 3 pounds, helping Wyatt recover some of his losses. The urgent task was to weave a new net. Luckily, the production team provided enough parachute cord for Wyatt to make a second, larger, and more robust net. He completed this task on the same day, saving the scraps for future repairs. Wyatt felt confident that this new net would perform better. Once the net was set up, he prepared firewood for the evening. Spruce trees of forearm thickness were just right and easy to handle. Just a day later, Wyatt's new gill net brought him a huge surprise, a nearly 15-pound pike. This catch helped him move past the loss of his lure. The pike, measuring 42 inches, provided nearly 10,000 calories, enough for Wyatt to eat for a week. Although he knew many ways to preserve food, smoking and dehydration were most suitable for the wilderness. He gutted and filleted the fish by the river, then smoked it over a day until perfectly cooked, inside and out. This allowed him to indulge in a lavish dinner and breakfast the next day. However, his joy was short-lived as a storm hit the area, forcing contestants to stay inside their shelters. Wyatt braved the wind to retrieve his net from the lake, fearing it might be lost in the bad weather. Once the storm passed, he repaired the damaged parts of the net and set it back where he had caught the large pike, hoping for another big catch to increase his chances of winning the $500,000 prize. Just as things seemed to be improving, Wyatt shared some bad news with the camera. A few days earlier, while chopping branches, he accidentally stabbed his arm with a piece of wood. Although he had removed the splinter, the wound had not healed completely and was oozing pus, a sign of infection that could seriously affect his competition. He couldn't afford to ignore it. From the medical knowledge he learned from his nurse wife, Wyatt knew spruce contains antibacterial agents that help stop bleeding. He boiled spruce water to clean the wound and applied spruce resin to prevent bacteria from entering. This was the only medicine he could find here, hoping it would help heal the wound. By day 34, the temperature at the challenge site had dropped significantly. Wyatt, with his third lure, went to the lake to try his luck. The lure quickly attracted a pike, but he reeled in too fast and missed the opportunity. He continued fishing, and at 8:30 a.m., another fish bit. This time, without incident, he caught a plump trout weighing 6 pounds, providing 3,800 calories, a significant gain. After processing the fish, he returned to fishing, only to be surprised when a cast sent his last lure flying off into the water. Shocked, Wyatt lost his final hook. His emotional roller coaster was best described as dramatic. He chose to smile despite his frustration, realizing he couldn't fish anymore that day. Instead, he took his bow and arrows into the woods to hunt for grouse and rabbits, comforting himself to accept what he couldn't change. His calm was soon replaced by the excitement of the hunt. Spotting a grouse in the bushes, he quickly shot and killed it with one arrow. Continuing his walk, he then saw a squirrel and took it down with another precise shot. Clearly, whether fishing or hunting, Wyatt proved his expertise. Today, before checking the gill net, Wyatt walked to the lakeside. From a distance, he could see a fish in the net, which immediately brightened his mood. Losing the lure seemed less bothersome now. Although the fish wasn't very large, it was enough to sustain Wyatt for an additional 2 days. He realized that nature rewards and punishes equally, neither allowing one to take too much nor leaving one's efforts unrewarded. Wyatt's injured arm, however, had not improved after several days of care and had even developed an abscess. Unsure of what else he could do, he continued to regularly clean and keep the wound dry, changing the bandage as needed. Later, Wyatt, with his fourth lure, came to the lakeside. The temperature had dropped so much that it was freezing his hands. It seemed the fish had moved to deeper waters, and despite standing for a long time, he had no bites, and his hands suffered from the cold. Nevertheless, Wyatt had enough food stored, so he wasn't worried about his immediate sustenance. Since he couldn't get food from the lake, he returned to the woods. His stock of berries was running low, and he needed to gather more before they were gone for the season. While fats and proteins are crucial for surviving in the wilderness, vitamins are also important. Wyatt found a bush full of berries and collected the remaining few into a plastic bucket he had, making sure not to overlook any edible parts. Besides foraging, his days were spent chopping wood, as his shelter required a continuous fire at night. He knew approximately how much wood he would need each night and aimed to saw 30 to 50 logs a day, each about half a meter long. That evening, Wyatt noticed something unusual about his worsening wound. Using tweezers, he extracted a 2-centimeter-long piece of wood from his arm, finally understanding why the wound had not healed. With this foreign body removed, he expected regular cleaning and bandaging would now lead to healing. By day 42, Wyatt found a large batch of mushrooms, which he did not recognize. However, seeing chew marks from mice and squirrels at the base of the mushrooms, he reasoned if animals could eat them, they might be safe for him too. He ate a small piece and waited half an hour to see if he would have any adverse reactions before deciding they were safe to eat. Having had success hunting in the woods before, Wyatt went back with his bow and arrows, thinking he could supplement the lack of fish with grouse and squirrels. After some time, he found grouse tracks in the snow, and soon spotted one in a tree, which he took down with a single shot. While retrieving it, he saw another, and took that one too. Wyatt proved himself a versatile contestant, skilled in both fishing and bow hunting, easily securing 2 grouse. More pleasing than catching the grouse was that, after half an hour, he had no adverse reactions from the mushrooms, so he decided to treat himself to a meal of chicken stewed with mushrooms, cooking 1 grouse on the grill and the other in a soup. As a warm front passed, melting all the snow on the ground, Wyatt entered the woods hoping to catch more grouse or squirrels. However, nature's generosity has its limits, and this time he found nothing. Turning his steps towards where he had set his gill net, he found it finally had a catch after being empty for days. The fish, nearly slipping out, weighed about 4 pounds. Wyatt's luck had been good lately, either hunting grouse in the woods or catching fish from the lake. He felt more in harmony with the land each day, though he wondered if the other contestants were as fortunate. Over the next few days, his lifestyle could be described as luxurious. After enjoying a hearty breakfast this morning, Wyatt went out hunting with his bow and arrows. At this point, he still had 8 large fish fillets in reserve, and he felt no physical or mental pressure. After walking through the woods without spotting any animals, he headed to the lakeside for his routine check of the gill net. Each time he checked, he couldn't contain his excitement. The familiar scene replayed, no catch from hunting, but a fish awaited him in the net. This time, it was a large pike, boosting his confidence in winning even more. He even began to daydream about his father telling him about the moment he would win. However, could things really continue so smoothly? On day 50, the temperature continued to fall. Despite the worsening conditions, Wyatt was not worried due to his ample supplies. His spirit in front of the camera was stronger than ever. After an unsuccessful hunting trip, he routinely sawed enough firewood for heating and retreated to his shelter to enjoy his stockpile. Just as he said at the start of the competition, he had been eating smoked fish for 50 days and was not yet tired of it, still savoring each bite with delight. But accidents happen quickly. At midnight, strong winds howled, and the moss in the meat gaps dried out by the fire caught flame. Fortunately, Wyatt heard the noise in time, ran out, and smothered the burning moss, then doused it with half a pot of water. This quick action prevented the fire from reaching his shelter. The incident left him so shaken that he dared not close his eyes all night, fearing a resurgence that could burn down his shelter. The next morning, the weather was still harsh. Braving the sub-zero temperatures, he gathered stones around and built a thick windbreak around the chimney. He also regularly splashed water on the chimney walls to reduce the likelihood of fire. 3 days later, it seemed Wyatt had caught 2 more fish, although the video didn't show it. He laid a few branches in front of the meat smoker and smoked the fish, cut into small pieces. The original smoker by the river was too far given the cold, requiring frequent wood additions, so he devised this method to smoke fish. Indeed, his skills were excellent. All pieces of fish were smoked to a golden brown, almost fragrant through the screen. With no grouse left in the woods and the fish hiding in the deeper, warmer parts of the lake, fishing was unfruitful. Thus, Wyatt's days were mostly spent chopping enough firewood. Gradually, the lake surface began to freeze, rendering the gill net unusable. Before it completely froze, Wyatt exerted great effort to pry the log and retrieve the net. On day 56, the ice on the lake was finally thick enough to walk on. As an experienced wild survivalist, Wyatt decided to try ice fishing in the deep water. Before heading out, he made an ice ladder to distribute his weight. He cut matching slots in 2 handrail posts, inserted the crossbars, and secured them with rope. He then took the ladder to the center of the ice, where he measured the water to be over 3 meters deep, less than he wanted, but he dared not go further for fear the ice was too thin. Unfortunately, after hours of waiting, there was no activity, and he was extremely cold. For 2 consecutive days, he caught nothing. Wyatt then took out his gill net, which had been unused for days, and patiently untangled and laid it in the lake. He cut a long, narrow hole in the ice, placed the net, and secured it with 3 crossbars for easy access. That night, after dinner in his shelter, Wyatt discovered one of his toenails had fallen off, a sign of dehydration in the cold which causes nails to split and fall off. He felt no pain because his entire foot was numb, yet misfortune did not come singly. Before he could recover from the loss of his toenail, the wall near the fireplace caught fire. Flames shot up suddenly, but fortunately he had plenty of water prepared inside the shelter, preventing a total loss. Even if he didn't withdraw from the competition, the days ahead would have been very difficult. It seems that luck is leaving Wyatt. His shelter is a constant worry, and even the once promising gill net has stopped yielding catches. Now, he is entirely living off his reserves, spending his days tending the fire. While he hasn't felt the intense homesickness that many contestants experience, accidents keep happening. On the night of the 62nd day, a fierce wind blew all night long. When daylight came and he went to check the gill net, he found that the ice had been blown apart by the strong winds. The net was adrift in the middle of the lake, unreachable. This net was his best hope for food, and finding it lost left Wyatt heartbroken, as he only had 1 last trout left. Once that was eaten, he would be completely out of supplies. The harsh winter made it impossible to find food in the woods or the lake, making the championship seem far out of reach. It's possible that his competitors are in a similar situation, or they might still have plenty of food, but he was certain he could no longer secure any food himself. Even if he stayed in the shelter and starved for a few days, it was unlikely that a champion would emerge in that time. So after much internal struggle, Wyatt chose to withdraw from the competition. Although he didn't win the $500,000 prize, he had no regrets about this wilderness journey. He had fished, hunted, and shot grouse, leaving nothing undone. On day 66 of the competition, aside from shooting a grouse, Allan relied solely on fishing for his food. He is the champion of Season 10 of Alone in the Wilderness, a contestant skilled both technically and mentally. This episode takes us through his championship journey. Allan is a high school teacher who teaches outdoor survival skills, English, and sociology. Influenced by his father, he has always enjoyed hunting and fishing. Decades of experience have given him a significant advantage, especially since he once lived in an area similar to the competition site. He entered the competition hoping to use the prize money to improve his family's living conditions. On the first day of the competition, before even exploring his surroundings, Allan started making fishing lures, demonstrating his practical approach. He didn't spend much time or effort on his shelter like some contestants. He was experienced and confident in fishing, even having insights into choosing the right materials. Black spruce with a 40 to 60% moisture content sinks in water. He carved a basic shape, then wrapped it with steel wire and parachute cord. The finished product looked good, but catching fish would depend on luck. Allan was familiar with the fish in the lake, knowing it was their spawning season, and they were closer to shore, making them easier to catch. After standing by the shore for half an hour, he felt a tug on the line and immediately began reeling in, worried the fish might escape if he was too slow. He caught a good-sized trout, about 2 pounds, making it the first fish caught by the contestants this season. Allan was extremely grateful, thanking the fish excitedly. As expected, there were many fish eggs inside, which looked appetizingly yellow. That evening, Allan set up camp by the lake, started a campfire, and waited for the fish to cook while enjoying the lake and mountain scenery. Knowing the importance of fat in maintaining weight and securing victory from previous seasons, he ate the fish eggs and skin, even though he usually disliked them, forcing himself to get used to them. Allan kept his shelter simple. First, he tied the tops of 3 tree trunks to form a tripod, then spread them out on the ground. He added more logs around to enhance the structure's load-bearing capacity and stability. He then tied horizontal sticks across the middle and covered the surface with fresh spruce branches, followed by a thick layer of moss, leaving only the top open for a smoke outlet. The dense root system of moss offers excellent waterproofing and insulation, so Allan didn't even need to use a tarp. This efficient construction saved him a significant amount of calories compared to other contestants who took weeks to complete their shelters. Yesterday, he set several traps in the forest, knowing that berries alone wouldn't win him the championship. The traps surprisingly caught a marten instead of the intended rabbits. Local laws only permit hunting them with bows and arrows, so Allan had to release it, risking a bite. He covered the marten's head with his jacket and cut the wire tied to the tree. Considering the risk of accidentally killing protected animals with his traps, Allan decided to dismantle them and wait for snow to track snow hares, avoiding the risk of ending up in jail for violating wildlife protection laws while competing in Alone in the Wilderness. Next, Allan would focus on fishing as his main food source. However, after trying several spots without success, the competition quietly reached its 16th day. Allan then found a new promising spot, hoping it wouldn't disappoint him this time. He believes his greatest strength is persistence. He always manages to overcome obstacles and keep trying despite failures. Finally, Allan caught a fish from the lake, his first catch after many days. This 5-pound trout could provide enough protein to last him 3 days. He planned to eat the fish meat over 2 days and the head and bones on the 3rd day. Having not had a proper meal in 5 days, the appearance of this fish was a relief. The next day, Allan started making a gill net at camp to maximize the lake's fish resources. He worked overtime to finish the net by that afternoon. With winter approaching, fishing would become particularly difficult, so he had high hopes for the gill net, which could work around the clock. He tied it to a long tree trunk and set it up to wait for a catch. Then, Allan set out to construct the door for his shelter. He measured the doorway and created a trapezoidal structure that was narrower at the top and wider at the bottom. He gathered a large amount of moss from nearby and used it as a windbreak layer in the middle of the door, securing it with branches to prevent the moss from falling off. After testing, he found the door fit perfectly. The next day, full of hope, Allan went to check the gill net by the lake, but was disappointed to see it was empty, visible even from the shore. He noticed the weather cooling rapidly, food beginning to spoil, and no animal tracks in the forest. Fishing seemed to be the only way for Allan to obtain food here. The trout he had caught could only feed him until today, so he had to make the most of his time. He then saw a large fish attracted by his lure. Although it didn't bite, it was a great encouragement for Allan. What happened next was unexpected. After persistent waiting, he finally caught a fish from the lake. It wasn't big, but it thrilled Allan immensely. It was still early, so he decided to try his luck again and soon caught the first trout of the day. Thinking 2 fish might be his limit for the day, he reset the bait and waited. To his surprise, another fish bit soon after, and reeling it in went smoothly. Seeing his good luck, he decided to fish until dark. By 5:30 p.m., as Allan was getting slightly bored, the fishing line moved again. He quickly reeled in another trout. The 4 fish provided about 5,000 calories, an unbelievable bounty. Allan's catch today could be described as a result of hard work and luck. For the next week or so, he kept catching fish from the lake, significantly easing his food shortage. However, he didn't indulge but saved as much as possible, preparing for winter. Fish innards, usually not his choice, now became part of his meals. The caught fish needed to be smoked and dehydrated for longer preservation. He built a smokehouse similar in style to his shelter, with a conical wooden structure covered in moss. Inside, he made a smoking rack from wire and branches, placing the prepared fish on it. He chose wood from maple, birch, and willow trees for the fire, as their smoke contains fewer harmful substances, making the smoked fish tastier and healthier. Then, a storm hit the area, trapping Allan in his dwelling and preventing him from foraging. However, the smoking process was uninterrupted. He kept adding wood, preferring to oversmoke rather than risking spoilage. The lure he made at the start of the competition had severely deteriorated, so now with some time, he made a new one, this time with 2 larger hooks, thinking that a bigger lure might catch bigger fish. After the storm calmed down, Allan immediately went to the lakeside to test his new lure. Surprisingly, when he tried fishing, the experience startled him. Despite pulling the line taut, the fish managed to escape just short of the shore. The second fish escaped even faster, which somewhat frustrated Allan. By day 31, Allan noticed his face had become gaunter, where it once had been plump. He needed to eat more fish to slow his weight loss. However, His gill net wasn't very effective. It hadn't caught anything for half a month. Finally, it caught a merganser, but local laws only allowed hunting mergansers with a bow and arrow, not trapping. Despite the merganser being a potential feast, Allan had to release it due to the regulations. During the process, the net was severely damaged, but he prioritized fishing over repairing it. Today, the lake was choppy, and Allan stayed until evening without a bite. The next morning, he didn't fish, but repaired the gill net instead. After some effort, he managed to mend the large tear. The fishing spot was still rough, so he remembered another bay he had found, thinking its calmer waters would be more suitable for fishing. Packing his backpack and bow, he headed out, ready to hunt grouse, hares, or moose along the way. The trek through the dense forest was exhausting, but the secluded lake proved ideal for fishing, calm and suitable. Setting up his camera, Allan began fishing from the shore. The area was indeed rich in resources, and soon a fish slipped off his hook. Instead of dwelling on the setback, he quickly regained his composure to continue. Yet the same scenario happened again. Just as another fish was about to surface, it slipped off the hook. Allan couldn't believe his bad luck after losing 5 fish in a row. Despite the disappointment and frustration, Allan's optimistic nature helped him see the positive side. Although he hadn't caught any fish, he had found a new resource spot, making the trip ultimately worthwhile. He then placed the repaired gill net back in the water at a new location, hopeful that it wouldn't be another half-month before he caught a fish. Back at camp, the lake had returned to its usual calm. After 5 missed catches, Allan realized his hooks were too big for the trout's small mouths. He switched to smaller hooks, a change that proved correct when the next fish didn't escape. The relief from the long-standing tension was immense, and the beautiful lake fish renewed Allan's hopes for victory. Continuing to fish, Allan eventually noticed a huge fish biting. Unfortunately, he reeled in too quickly before the fish was securely hooked. Although the fish didn't go far and soon bit again, it had sharp teeth and bit through the fishing line, taking the lure and hook with it. Allan was surprised, but not upset, as knowing such a large fish was in the lake was promising. His failure this time didn't mean he would fail again. That night, Allan was woken by a mouse, an annoyance made worse when it chewed through the sweater his wife had given him. Before winter, mice gather warm materials to build their nests, making contestants' sweaters and down sleeping bags prime targets. Determined to prevent further damage, Allan constructed a trap inside his shelter using 2 stone slabs, a few branches, and fish as bait. This type of trap is known for its quick trigger mechanism and is often used by contestants in Alone in the Wilderness to deal with mice. After dawn, Allan made a new lure, and to prevent it from being bitten off by fish again, he attached a long segment of steel wire as a leader. Eager to face the fish that got away, he hurried back to the lakeside for a rematch. Despite waiting for a bite, Allan unexpectedly saw a grouse land in the woods. He quickly reeled in his line, returned to camp for his bow and arrow, and quietly entered the woods to find the grouse's landing spot. Lowering his voice, he set up the camera, drew his bow, and shot the grouse cleanly. Until now, Allan had either not seen any grouse or only noticed them as they flew away. This time, he finally managed to hunt one to change up his diet. As for the mouse that chewed through his sweater on the night of day 36 while half asleep, Allan heard the sound of a mouse gnawing nearby. He swung a stick and dramatically killed the mouse. A few days later, the first snow of the season fell. Allan checked the gill net as usual, but for some reason, it still hadn't caught any fish. He had to place all his hopes on fishing. Based on his current reserves, Allan estimated his food would last until about day 55, insufficient for winning the championship, so he needed to persevere with fishing. Unfortunately, the same issue happened again as 3 fish got off the hook, leaving him very disappointed. Day 43 was his birthday, with the weather still gloomy, cold, and windy. Limited by the wilderness conditions but wanting to maintain some sense of celebration, Allan stacked 3 fish fillets to resemble a cake and used a spark-emitting stick as a candle. Usually allowing himself only half a fish per day, he decided to eat more on his birthday after feeling a bit dizzy while bending over. His body was growing weaker and needed more food. The softly cooked fish was delicious, especially with the smoky flavor. It was irresistibly good, and he ate everything down to the last bit, feeling full. Next, he went to check the gill net, and surprisingly, after more than 40 days without a catch, the net finally had something. Initially, Allan thought he was mistaken, but when he pulled the net out of the water, he confirmed it contained a fish weighing about 5 pounds, the largest he had caught so far. Grateful for nature's birthday gift, he was overjoyed. Allan cleaned the fish by the lake, securing food for another 2 days. As the competition progressed, each fish represented a step closer to the $500,000 prize. As a warm front passed, melting the snow, Allan performed a checkup on camera. Although he had lost 23 kilograms since the start of the competition, he was fortunate to have gained weight beforehand, still retaining some fat reserves. With the rare warm weather, he didn't hesitate to seize the chance to fish by the lake. After standing by the shore for a couple of hours, he finally caught a fish without it getting away, securing food for 2 more days. The championship seemed within reach, one small victory at a time. However, an unexpected issue arose. Allan found a large number of parasites on the liver of a trout. The sight was disconcerting, as improper cooking could lead to infection, potentially disqualifying a contestant. Reluctant to discard the food, each bite could impact his chances of winning. After some consideration, Allan decided to eat it anyway, making sure to cook it thoroughly. He neatly divided the trout into 2 pieces, demonstrating decent culinary skills. One half was placed in the smokehouse, while the other was vigorously boiled to ensure all parasites were killed. He mashed the fish meat and inspected it closely to avoid consuming any parasites. Ideally, he would have saved this fish for last, but considering the general malnutrition among contestants, their decision-making might not be as sharp as viewers would expect, making their actions somewhat understandable. As temperatures continued to drop steadily, Allan still focused on fishing for food. However, the cooler weather drove the fish to the warmer, deeper waters, resulting in 2 unsuccessful fishing attempts. Fortunately, his stored food was ample enough that Allan wasn't at risk of going hungry anytime soon. He could manage by staying warm by the fire and eating smoked fish. By day 55 of the competition, the ice on the lake was thick enough to support walking. Allan planned to fish in deeper areas by breaking through the ice, but for safety, he made a pair of snowshoes first. He simply tied crossbars at the ends of 5 or 6 branches. He ventured to the center of the lake, an area he had never reached before, and chopped a hole in the ice of appropriate size with his axe. He also gathered a pile of moss from the woods. The sugar alcohol in the moss has antifreeze properties that can melt ice. Placing the moss around the hole helped prevent it from freezing over. Fans of wilderness survival shows would know that ice fishing not only tests the contestants' skills, but also their luck. Since the snowfall, the fish had not been very active, and Allan didn't catch any fish for 3 consecutive days. The long nights were torturous, and without any form of entertainment by the fire, it was hard for contestants to manage their emotions. Fortunately, Allan's patience was strong. He knew that even if he quit and went home, he would have nothing to do. His wife was at work, and his children were at school. He would likely regret not continuing in the competition, especially since he still had food left. With this mindset, he reached day 64. The last remaining competitor who had run out of food finally quit. On day 66, the production team brought Allan's wife, following the usual practice of conducting a health check as a pretext to inform him of his victory. In reality, his food supply was also nearly depleted, and he would have chosen to quit once it ran out. Although no large animals were caught in Season 10, several contestants performed exceptionally well, with Allan emerging as the ultimate victor.